Chapter 61, Strange Symbol, the Fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the grey fog. King of yellow and black who wields good luck, Audrey Hall recited the three descriptions to herself silently. She suddenly felt a tumultuous wave of emotion go through her, preventing her from maintaining her spectator state. As an aficionado of mysticism, she had learned Hermes that was used in rituals and had tested out the rituals that fellow noble aficionados mentioned in private gatherings before she was pulled into the grey fog or made formal contact with beyonder powers. None of those rituals had any effects, but they had given Audrey a basic understanding of the structure of incantations. Thus, she knew clearly what these three incantations described and signified. The descriptions usually described one of the 7 gods that looked over this world. Thus, the Fool's incantation was claiming status equal to the Lady of Crimson, Mother of the Secrets, and the Empress of Disaster and Horror. Is Mr. Fool the unknown, mysterious, powerful, godlike entity that Glaint spoke of? The source of danger that we must avoid in rituals? Audrey quickly recalled the comments made during the strange rituals which she and her friends did not dare attempt back then. She was momentarily at a loss for words. Alger Wilson, who knew and understood much more than Audrey, shivered from the bottom of his heart. If the ritualistic magic which Mr. Fool designed truly points to him to allow him to accept our requests, we would have to be addressing him with him. He is to be addressed in the third person, which is reserved for gods. How lucky, how smart I was to act in concert with him and not do anything foolish. Even when I was testing him, I did not step beyond the boundaries of normalcy. Could he perhaps be an ancient, mysterious, horrifying existence, only that he does not appear before us in his true form and name? The primordial Demoness, the hidden sage, or the true creator which many mysterious churches believe in? Alger understood that the fool he was looking at now might not be his true form. He might not even have a gender or be a humanoid creature. Klein propped his forehead up with one hand and tapped on the table with the other hand. He acutely noticed the changes happening to the hanged man and Justice. But he acted as though nothing happened, as if everything was within his expectations. He continued without any care. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Fingered citron, an herb that belongs to the sun, please bestow your powers to my incantation. He finished describing the incantations that belonged to another type of ritual. After he was done, he smiled. Lady, sir, have you memorized it? Ah, Audrey exhaled. She quickly covered her mouth and recalled seriously. With her improved memory as a spectator, she quickly processed the information and repeated the incantations as a form of confirmation. Alger acted more normally. His pen did not stop for a moment, no matter what he was thinking about. After Klein confirmed that Audrey was correct, he smiled and said, if this test is successful, then we shall modify the ritual next time to achieve what we want to do. I hope that you will have the time to complete the ritual no later than Wednesday. He intended to come in here again on Thursday night to ascertain if the ritualistic magic was successful. As for why he did not allow the hanged man and Justice to directly request a leave of absence, Klein was worried that he would be unable to discern if the results were from them asking for leave or merely the outcome of an attempt of the ritualistic magic. Was he to pull them into the gathering if that happened? By your will. Audrey and Alger replied respectfully, collecting themselves. According to the hanged man's suggestion last week, we shall have a time for casual conversation after all official issues have been discussed. Who shall begin? Klein gave a hand gesture signaling for someone to start. Audrey sighed and said, Mr. Fool, the suggestion you made regarding the exam selection and the separation between civil and political matters has received the approval of many members of Parliament. Perhaps it could become a reality. Of course, with the efficiency of this government, the bill will only appear half a year from now at the earliest. She was not worried that the hanged man would track her down using this piece of information. She had intentionally and intermittently dropped hints and guided those proud wives to think that they had conceived the idea. Those ladies had rushed to tell their husbands, their fathers, and their brothers. At that moment Audrey felt as though she was watching a flock of golden peacocks showcasing their tail feathers. She believed that those women would drill it in themselves that they came up with the idea to claim the glory for themselves. They would soon forget about what Audrey's role in the matter was, fighting among themselves to see who thought of the suggestion first. Using this remarkable way to change the system of a kingdom gave Audrey a weird sense of satisfaction, as if she had found a way for a spectator to influence the plot of a play. "Let's hope so," Alger replied sarcastically. He paused for a few seconds, then glanced at the fool. He deliberated before saying, "In recent decades, the amount of activities of the various secret organizations has seen an upward trend. In fact, there are even new secret organizations appearing, some of them having reached scale with a good number of Beyonders. Are you trying to ask me for the reason? I have not even gained access to information about illegal organizations." Klein merely smiled without commenting on the hanged man's news. He changed the subject and said vaguely, "An ancient power is about to wake from its slumber. For example, the power represented by the Antigonus family diary." "Is that so?" Alger muttered softly to himself, as though he recalled something. Klein swept his gaze toward the hanged man, then past Justice and said with a smile, "If there is nothing else to share, then let's end today's gathering here." "By your will." Audrey and Alger stood up together. Klein moved his finger and severed his connection with the dark red stars. He watched as the two figures vanished from the magnificent palace. He stood up and turned toward his own chair, which was also the back of the seat of honor at the bronze table. He looked at its symbol. Radiant stars formed a strange symbol. It was not a symbol that fit anything in Klein's present understanding of mysticism. He observed it closely before identifying the pupilless eye, a symbol representing secrecy. He also saw contorted lines that represented change. Each of the symbols were missing a portion and were overlapped with each other, creating a new symbol. An incomplete secret and an incomplete change. What do we get when we add them together? Klein creased his brows and muttered to himself, unable to come up with an answer. He retracted his gaze and walked along the ancient, magnificent palace. His eyes scanned every corner of the palace. "Back when I casually imagined this place, it was merely a rough concept. I did not describe the shape of the palace, table, or chairs. Where does this design come from? The best choice? The first prototype? Or are they a reflection of reality?" Klein suddenly had a question he neglected previously as he looked at the palace. "Sigh, I have to say that even though I am a keyboard warrior, I am lacking experience in many areas. I am also not observant enough, to the point of only realizing this question now." With such a self-reflection, Klein made a serious effort to examine every corner of the palace, but did not find any other living things or anything strange. Klein did not dare to venture deeper, which seemed to be an illusory land without boundaries. He was afraid that he would end up completely lost. Wow, this place is indeed filled with mysteries. Who knows if there will be any changes to this area when I become more powerful? Klein sighed. He unleashed his spirituality and enveloped himself within, causing him to feel the rapid rush of plummeting. Everything flew past quickly. All kinds of illusions shattered. He tore through the grayish-white fog and saw reality. He saw the table, curtains, and clothes rack in his room. Backlund, Empress Burrow. Audrey saw the oil painting that hung on the wall. She felt the softness the down-feathered pillow under her head provided. She did not stand up immediately. Instead, she seriously recalled what had happened during the gathering, as if she was watching a play she had already watched. Mr. Fool had a certain confidence in his tone when he told us to try the ritual and gave us the descriptions of the mysterious ruler, the King of Yellow and Black. Confidence, Audrey exhaled as she was analyzing this silently, her body shuddering slightly. Forget it, since I cannot fight it, there's no need to think too much about it. Mr. Fool has always appeared friendly, he should be an entity that has a respect for order. Audrey's mood improved rapidly. She thought about her acting, and the weakening backlash of the potion. She hummed a merry tune and got off her bed. She walked toward the door and adjusted her state of mind, taking on her state as a spectator. As she opened the door of the room, she saw a maid walking past. She saw the old calluses on her hands, the marks on her face, and other similar details. She could deduce many things from these observations. At this point, Audrey had a strange feeling. She quickly turned to look at the shaded corner of the balcony. She saw her golden retriever Susie sitting there, silently observing her, just like how she observed the maid. My goddess. Audrey's lips twitched as she sighed. She wanted so much to hide her face. On the Sonia Sea, in the heavily protected captain's quarters. Alger woke up and noticed that nothing had changed around him. It was as if nothing had happened. He sighed and thought to himself, an ancient existence? Klein, who had exited the ritual, pulled open the curtains. He took out his notebook and began writing once again. He recalled the contents of Emperor Roselle's diary, hoping to reinforce the memory through writing and prevent himself from forgetting it in the future. Klein reread the notes several times after he finished writing. Finally, he tore the notes up and incinerated them. I shouldn't forget the most salient points if I do this once a week. But with time and the increasing complexity of my missions. How unfortunate, I do not have better ideas for the time being. I have not learned any cryptography. Klein collected himself and stretched his neck. He planned on heading to the divination club. A seer was defined differently by different people. No one could say that another person's methods were wrong. So, Klein, who did not know which kind of seer fit the requirements of the potion, could only correct it as he experimented to ascertain which one was the best fit. Chapter 62, The Seer's Suggestion. Before Klein left home, he took the time to meticulously clean up his suit and top hat with a small brush and a handkerchief. Then, he washed his white shirt, changing into a similar linen shirt along with the only decent cheap coat he had. He then briskly walked out onto the street. First, Melissa's dress. Then, Benson's suit. Only then can I consider a second suit for myself. Money is never enough. Besides, we need to save money to buy porcelain tableware to receive our guests. Plus, I have to save money to buy a variety of materials related to mysticism. Klein sat on the public carriage and took note of the financial status at home. The more he did the math, the more he shook his head. He reckoned he needed at least a year to let himself, his brother, and his sister live as a middle-class family. Of course, that was without taking promotions and pay rises into consideration. The public carriage drove past the streets and stopped opposite to the Divination Club on House Street. Klein pressed down on his black top hat and hopped off the carriage. He walked along the familiar street and entered the club located on the second floor. He then saw the beautiful brunette, Angelica. There was a hint of swelled redness to her eyes, but she looked extremely relaxed. Klein raised his hand to tap his glabella lightly and carefully examined her. He found out that the grayness deep in Angelica's emotional colors had greatly dispersed. It had been replaced with sunlight-like whiteness. After taking it in, Klein walked over, took off his hat, and smiled. Madam Angelica, it's a lovely day today, isn't it? Angelica lifted her head and was briefly shocked. She then beamed and said, You are just like Mr. Vincent's cat. You don't make any sounds while walking, do you? You managed to tell? Hee, I forgot that you are a fortune teller skilled in face reading. She paused, then she gently bit her lip before bowing. Thank you. Thank you for your suggestion yesterday. I feel much better. I haven't been this relaxed, happy, and contented in a year. Upon hearing her show her sincere gratitude, Klein was infected with the joy and happiness she had. The corner of his lips lifted, and he said, It's my pleasure. As he spoke, he could feel his spirituality relax and turn livelier. Is this what the seer potion wants? A seer that can really help the inquirer? Klein pinched his glabella as though he was thinking before secretly tapping twice. It had to be said that he found the action of activating and deactivating his spirit vision in practice insufficiently inconspicuous. However, the problem was that he hadn't thought of a better solution yet. As he had just become a seer recently, his spiritually had yet to reach its limit, and the same was applied to his mastery. Hence, there didn't seem to be many suitable locations for an activation switch for his spiritual vision. The glabella was the best option by far. When I become a true seer after fully digesting the potion, should be able to design a more inconspicuous activation motion. Klein nodded unnoticeably and walked towards the half-opened meeting room. Coffee or tea? Angelica asked hurriedly. Desi coffee. Klein answered. He planned on trying out all the drinks the divination club had to offer. Then, he saw that there were 6 or 7 members present, but not Hannes Vincent, who was almost always was. Mr. Vincent isn't here? Klein stopped in his tracks and asked a passing question. Angelica was taken aback as she said, Mr. Vincent doesn't come every day. He accepted an invitation to give a lecture for a divination organization at Enmat Harbor. Are you looking for him? Not at all. I was just curious. After all, I've seen him every time I've come here. Klein shook his head with a smile. Meanwhile, he realized that there was a familiar face among the 7 members present. Glassy, who had divined for him before, was present. Glassy was reading some information on the table with his monocle when he suddenly sensed someone looking at him. He lifted his head, cast his gaze. Obvious joy suffused his face as he propped himself up with both hands and stood up. He dashed towards Klein and stopped before him. Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. I have been wondering if you would come today. I heard from Angelica that you are not a doctor, but a fortune teller who is good at face reading. Klein smiled. That's not the only thing I'm good at. Mr. Glassy. You no longer seem plagued by your ailment? He pinched his forehead and tapped his glabella twice. He noticed that Glassy's health colors had returned to normal. Yes, I was very regretful for not taking your suggestion back then. Luckily, there is a very amazing apothecary near my place. He gave my wife a magical medicine which brought me away from death, Glassy said emotionally. As a quasi-member of the Nighthawks, Klein asked out of occupational interest, very amazing apothecary? Very magical medicine? Magical? How magical? Is it within the range of Beyonders? He said that it was a kind of folk medicine from Lenberg. In short, it helped with treating my illness a lot, Glassy answered, without noticing anything abnormal about the question. Folk medicine apothecary? Klein tapped his glabella as though he was thinking. What's his name? Where does he stay? As you know, even a fortune teller can't guarantee that they would remain in the pink of health all the time. Perhaps, I will need to go to purchase some medication from him in the future. Klein learned from his teacher and classmates that the current health system in the world was in a nascent state. There was almost no cure to many diseases, so the magical medications and miraculous apothecaries still controlled the market. There was no harm in knowing more, since it could one day serve useful. Glassy answered honestly, his name is Lawson Darkwade. He has a tiny store at 18 Vlad Street in Eastborough, named Lawson's Folk Herb Store. Thank you. Klein remembered it and spoke sincerely. Glassy turned around and invited him to sit beside him. At that moment, Angelica came over to serve the coffee she brewed. Compared to Southville coffee, Desi coffee is more fragrant, but has quite an inferior taste. Klein took a sip and savored it for a moment. Glassy hurriedly deliberated his words when he saw Klein put down his white porcelain cup. Mr. Moretti, can I request a divination from you? I will pay according to a price you set. 8 pence is sufficient. I will not raise the price out of the blue. Klein was hoping that someone would request his divination services. Do you need a divination room? All right. Topaz. Glassy led the way with much more familiarity. After entering the divination room and locking the door, Klein sat behind the long table. He asked in a serious voice, Mr. Glassy, what would you like the divination to be about? I have an investment opportunity, but the amount of money it involves is huge. If it fails, my family and I will take a heavy hit. I wish to know if it will be a successful investment. Glassy volunteered the information. I have divined using tarot cards previously. A divination after purifying my soul. The result was pretty good. Yes, I did the interpretation myself, but I did not violate the principles of those symbols. Klein thought and asked curiously, "It'd be great if you could describe the entire situation once more and give me your information again. It'd be best if you have the other party's information, too. We will do an astrolabe divination." "All right." Glassy organized his words and said, "When Mr. Lenevis examined the Hornacis mountain range, he discovered a gigantic mine rich in high-quality iron ore. He poured in all his savings to buy that land and hired a professional company to survey it. The result was a heartening one. He lacks funds needed for subsequent developments, so he formed the Steelworks Company and intends to apply for a loan from the bank using the project. At the same time, he will also issue a corresponding number of shares to raise its initial capital. The plan is still in its preparatory stage and promises fat returns." Klein, who had been reading the newspaper recently and also happened to be a history expert, knew that there were shares in this world. He also knew that the concept of shares was derived from Emperor Roselle. Yeah, him again. During the colonization of the southern continent, he had set up the Sibrin Company and solved the nation's fiduciary matters successfully by raising funds from the public through the issue of shares. As such, he had the first mover's advantage from colonization. Because the returns were great, this development continued on. For example, there were railway shares, mining shares, steam development shares, and so on and so forth. There were some that succeeded and there were some that failed. Hence, it catalyzed the formation of organizations like the Backlund Stock Exchange. Besides that, the Emperor Roselle had created national bonds, unit trusts, and other financial products. The former had become the most stable form investment, with a return of 4 to 6% interest. Klein remembered that Benson had once said that if he could inherit £3,000, there was no need to work hard any further. The stable annual interest of about 5% would result in an annual fixed income return of £150, roughly equivalent to Klein's annual income at present. This is known as rentier capitalism. Klein sighed and asked carefully, "Are you sure there's nothing wrong about this? Is Lenevis trustworthy? I've seen his property papers and the inspection report. There is the Civilaus County government stamp and an endorsement of a professional company. Plus, inside Mr. Lenevis's office is a group photo of him with Sir Deweyville and the mayor." Glassy nodded in reply. "Group photo? That doesn't mean anything." Klein, who was born in an era of information explosion, had seen too many similar incidents. He didn't buy the story because of that. However, it didn't matter if he believed it or not. He could only pick up a pen and draw a corresponding astrolabe according to the crucial time and information that Glassy had provided him with. After a long while, Klein pointed to the astrolabe and said, "You should be able to tell that this will be a very unsuccessful endeavor. Below the flourishing surface is a cliff, a chasm. My divination suggestions going around it, to avoid it." Glassy fell into silence, his mouth turning agape a few times before he closed it. A few minutes later, he said with a rueful smile, "I'll consider it carefully when I'm back." Upon hearing this answer, Klein could only shake his head with a silent sigh. He realized the helplessness of a seer. A seer could only give suggestions and not make the decision for others. Just as the two left the Topaz room, Angelica walked over and said, "Mr. Moretti, someone wishes for your divination." When she said that, she added with a whisper, "He did not ask for my recommendations. Nor did he view the album. Has my reputation spread?" Klein turned towards the reception hall in puzzlement. Chapter 63, Dream Interpretation. Klein proceeded a few steps forward and saw the client. He was dressed in a formal black suit and a half-top hat. He held a gold-inlaid wooden cane and his short blonde hair flared from the sides. His nose was aquiline like a hawk's beak. Anna's fiancé. The Joyce Meyer that went through a terrifying ordeal. Klein, who had seen him in his dream divination, immediately greeted with a smile, "Good afternoon, Mr. Meyer." "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti." Joyce took off his hat and bowed in greeting. Thank you for the advice you gave Anna. She cannot stop praising how miraculous you are. Klein chortled and said, I did not change a thing. You should be thanking yourself. Without your determination and your hope for a better tomorrow, you wouldn't have been able to overcome such an ordeal. After the exchange of pleasantries, Klein could not help but lampoon inwardly. Does this count as mutual professional bootlicking? In all honesty, I still find my coming back alive a dream. I still cannot believe that I survived wave after wave of terrifying ordeals. Joyce shook his head wistfully. Without waiting for Klein's reply, he asked curiously, You knew who I was the moment you saw me. Was that because of my unique nose, or because you divined that I would visit you? I had your detailed information. That is enough for a seer, Klein answered vaguely, behaving like how a charlatan would. Joyce was indeed stunned. More than 10 seconds later, he squeezed a smile. Mr. Moretti, I wish to request a divination from you. The moment he finished his sentence, he suddenly realized something. Mr. Klein Moretti had addressed himself as a seer, not a fortune-teller. A seer. All right, let us head to Topaz. Klein gestured. At that moment, he felt as though he should have worn a long black robe. He tried to keep his words to a minimum to accentuate the mystique of a seer. Joyce Meyer locked the door behind him after entering the divination room. While he observed his surroundings, Klein seized the opportunity to tap his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. Joyce sat down and set his cane down beside him. He pulled on his black bow tie and said hoarsely, Mr. Moretti, I wish for you to interpret my dream. Dream interpretation? Klein acted as though it was within his expectations, but was merely asking for confirmation. He saw that the colors representing Joyce's health were dull, but none of them signified an impending illness. The colors symbolizing his emotions were predominantly blue, and its darkness showed that he was obviously high-strung. Joyce nodded seriously. I have had the same horrific dream every night ever since the Alfalfa arrived at Enmat Harbor. I know that this could be associated with the trauma of the ordeal and that I should go see a psychiatrist, but I suspect that this is no ordinary dream. A normal dream would definitely have some details that are different even if they recur every night, but this dream is, at the very least, constant in the parts which I can recall. To a seer, these kinds of dreams are seen as revelations given by the divine, Klein said, half consoling and half explaining. Can you describe the dream to me? Joyce clenched his fists and up to his. He thought deep for a moment before saying, I dreamed that I was falling from the Alfalfa into the ocean. The ocean was dark red, as if it was filled with rotting blood. As I fell, I was grabbed by a person on the boat. I could not identify him, but I know that he was very strong. And I was also holding on to a person in an attempt to save him from falling into the sea. I know that person. He was a passenger of the Alfalfa, Eunice Kim. Because of his weight and his struggling, I could not bear the weight and could only release my hands and watch him get devoured by the sea of blood. At that moment, the person above me also released his hand. I flailed my arms, hoping to grab onto something, but there was nothing. I could only plummet rapidly. Then I wake up in horror, sweat covering my back and forehead. Klein held his forehead and gently rapped it as though he was thinking. He then organized his words and said, Mr. Meyer, nightmares, similar nightmares, and repeated nightmares, these are all psychological problems and have a corresponding source. The same nightmare recurring time and time again is a reminder from your spirituality. It is also a revelation given to you by the divine. Upon seeing Joyce appearing confused, he elaborated, do not have any doubt, an ordinary person's spirituality is also capable of giving reminders. I do not know what exactly happened on the Alfalfa, but I can see that it was a tragedy of blood and steel. It has left a deep trauma in you. Seeing Joyce nod slightly, Klein continued, you must have been very horrified, very fearful on the ship. It is easy for a person to lose their observational skills when overwhelmed by such intense emotions, thus missing signs that they should not have been missed. This does not mean that you have not seen those signs, but you have disregarded them, you understand? Disregarded. In your subconscious, in your spirituality, the details that you have missed are present all the same. If the thing that the detail is pointing toward is important enough, then your spirituality will remind you in the form of a dream. Previously, I had similar case of disregarding a feeling, only to later realize that the diary was with Ray Bieber. But I was more sensitive and had stronger spirituality. I was also more knowledgeable about mysticism and thus could make a deduction more quickly. Klein paused for a few seconds and looked into Joyce Meyer's eyes. Did Mr. Eunice Kim, who you let fall into the sea of blood, requested you of something on the boat, but was ultimately unable to escape his fate? Joyce fidgeted his body unnaturally. He opened his mouth several times before answering, yes, but I do not pity him. Perhaps a few days or a week from now, you will see in the newspapers how cruel and evil he was. He raped and murdered at least 3 ladies and tossed a baby into the raging sea. He also led a bunch of savages who had lost their rationality and brutally massacred the passengers and crew of the boat. He was scheming, strong, and evil. I did not dare, nor could I stop him. I would only have forfeited my life. I am not doubting what you did, Klein said, making clear his stand. Then he explained, but your dream is telling me that you are feeling regret and sorry. You believe that you should not have released your hand back then. Since you believe that killing him was an act of justice, then why are you feeling regret and sorry for it, so much so that you have recurring dreams about you releasing your hand? I don't know either, Joyce shook his head, confused. Klein crossed his hands and placed it under his chin. He attempted to analyze the situation. Incorporating what I just described, it seems you have missed certain details. For instance, anything that Eunice Kim mentioned, his contents of his plea, the way he presented himself, etc. I cannot recall the incident for you, so please think about it carefully. There's nothing. All he could say back then was, spare me, I surrender, Joyce muttered in puzzlement. Klein did not know exactly what happened, so he could only guide him based on what he understood from the dream. Perhaps you felt that Eunice Kim was more useful alive, that he could prove something or to explain something? Joyce knitted his brows. It was a while before he said, perhaps. I still find the conflict that arose on the alfalfa happened too suddenly and turned intense too quickly. It was as if the passive evil in everyone's heart just erupted uncontrollably. It was too abnormal, very abnormal. Perhaps I wish to interrogate Eunice Kim why he acted as though he was possessed by the devil in the first place. Klein suddenly had a stroke of inspiration after hearing Joyce's dreamy description. He spoke mysteriously with a tone unique to charlatans. No, that's not the only reason. What? Joyce seemed shocked. Klein crossed his hands and held his chin up. He stared straight into Joyce's eyes and said with a slow, yet forceful tone, not only did you find the matter abnormal, but you also saw some things that you disregarded. And putting together these things that you disregarded results in a terrifying conclusion. Your spirituality is telling you that there is someone who should be under the highest suspicion. And that person is the one who had grabbed you but ultimately released his hand in the dream. You do not suspect him subconsciously, and thus you are unable to identify him. He is your partner. He once had control over your fate, or maybe, even saved you before. Joyce leaned back suddenly, slamming into the back of the chair with a dull thud. His forehead slowly became laced with sweat, his eyes filled with confusion. I see it. Joyce suddenly stood up noisily, causing his chair to wobble and nearly fall. Mr. Triss, he used all the energy in him to utter the name. He was a friendly and bashful little boy with a round face. He was the hero that saved the survivors. Klein did not interrupt Joyce's thoughts. He leaned back slightly and waited. Joyce's expression changed several times, finally returning to normal, a normal that had a little paleness. He revealed a rueful smile. I understand now. Thank you for interpreting my dream. Perhaps it is time for me to make a trip to the police station. He took out his leather wallet and fished out a 1 soldi note. I do not think that money can fully represent your worth, and I can only give you the price you asked for. This is for you. Joyce pushed the note toward Klein. I wouldn't have minded if you gave me 10 pounds. One solely, you sure are like your fiancé. Klein kept up his mysterious vibe as a charlatan and said nothing, smiling as he pressed on the note. Joyce took a deep breath, wore his hat, and turned to walk toward the door. As he was unlocking the door, he suddenly turned back and said with sincerity, "Thank you, Master Moretti." Master? Klein laughed to himself. He watched as Joyce left the divination room and said silently to himself, "Whatever happened on the Alfalfa seems extraordinary. If only the captain was here. He would be able to understand everything that happened in Joyce Meyer's dreams." Tuesday at dawn. Backlund, Empress Borough. Audrey, who woke up earlier, beckoned her golden retriever Susie over. She said with a serious tone, "Susie, you are also a Beyonder now." "We are the same kind, EW, no, what I mean is that we have to help each other. Guard the door later and don't let anyone disturb me. I have to conduct a ritual." Susie looked at her mistress and shook her tail in exasperation. Chapter 64, Instigator. After instructing her golden retriever, Susie, Audrey paced around, seemingly worried. She too was uncertain if the ritualistic magic would result in anything odd. "Let's do this." Her eyes turned calm as she used her state as a bystander to view the imagined process. Soon, she came to a new arrangement. Audrey unlocked the door to her bedroom and said to Susie, "Susie, sit here. If Annie and the rest try to barge their way in, immediately go to the bathroom to inform me." In order to prevent any accidents, her personal maidservant had the key to unlock her door. Susie looked at her enigmatically and wagged her tail thrice. "Very good. I will let you choose anything you want for lunch today." Audrey pumped her fist gently. After exhorting Susie, she entered the bathroom. The square bathtub was 3 to 4 meters on each side. There was clear water rippling gently in it with steam emitting from it. It was quite a dreamy sight. Audrey tidied up a rectangular table with many bottles placed on it. Then, she went back out and moved candles, sacrificial items, and a white robe over. Immediately after that, she closed the bathroom door. With everything done, Audrey heaved a sigh of relief and picked up a translucent light blue bottle beside the 4 candles. The cylindrical bottle shimmered dreamily under the light. In it was the essence oil she had distilled from a mixture yesterday. As an aficionado of mysticism, she had no lack of research regarding such items. She had many different kinds of pure dew, flower essence, perfume, essential oils, and incense that she brewed herself at home. As such, she had already finished the initial preparations according to the fool's instructions. Moon flowers, gold mint, slumber flowers, fingered citron, and rock rose. What an odd concoction, Audrey mumbled softly. Oh, one has to cleanse one's body and calm their mind before engaging in ritualistic magic. This is a form of reverence to the divine, to the target. As she went through the entire process in her head, she placed the ritual's essential oil beside her bathtub. She reached out and began disrobing what she wore at home. Pieces of her silk clothing fell into the laundry basket one after another. Audrey coiled up her hair into a bun and tested the water's temperature with her hand. Then, she carefully stepped into the bathtub, allowing her body to slowly sink into the water's warm embrace. Phew, she exhaled comfortably, finding herself warm all over. She felt abnormally relaxed. "I don't even want to move a single finger." Audrey forcefully pumped herself out as she grabbed the translucent light blue bottle beside her and dripped a few drops into the water. A waft of fragrance dispersed, filling the silence with a refreshing smell. Audrey breathed in a few times and nodded in satisfaction. "Not bad. It smells really good. How relaxing. How comfortable. I don't want to move at all. All I wish is to lie here in silence." Silence, in silence, lens. After losing her sense of time, Audrey suddenly heard barking. She opened her eyes in shock, looking to her sides in a daze. She had no idea when Susie had opened the door and entered. She was squatting outside the bathtub, looking at her with an exasperated look. As she rubbed the corners of her eyes, Audrey felt that the water had cooled down quite significantly. I fell asleep? She subconsciously asked herself. Susie looked at her without barking or wagging her tail. The effects of that bottle of ritual essential oil sure is great. Yeah, really great. Audrey chuckled dryly as she explained with a cheerful tone. She stood up, retrieved a towel, and as she wrapped and wiped her body, said to the golden retriever beside her, Susie, continue keeping watch. Do not let Annie and the rest enter. Only when the golden retriever left did she secretly stick out her tongue. She threw her towel aside and wore a clean white robe. After closing the door to the bathroom, Audrey recalled the ritual she had memorized. She picked up 4 candles and placed them on the 4 corners of the table. A loaf of white bread at the top left corner, a bowl of fenipater noodles at the top right corner. Smells great, but it's a little cold. No. It's not time to think of this. Paella at the bottom left corner and desi pie at the bottom right. Audrey set up the altar according to the fool's descriptions seriously, shaking her head twice during the process. After she was done with the preparation, she left her 4 candles lit. She picked up a silver knife and stabbed it into a pile of coarse salt. After narrating the sacred incantation in Hermes, Audrey raised the knife with beautiful patterns and placed it into a cup filled with clear water. After focusing her mind, she pulled out the silver, sacred blade, cogitating her spirituality to spew out and spread from her blade. Invisible energy spewed out as Audrey held the knife and circled the altar once. When she felt that a spirituality wall was fully erected around her, she expelled all the uncleanliness and distractions outside. Maintaining her spectator state, she prevented her excitement and joy from affecting the ritual. She put down the silver knife and picked up the tiny light blue crystalline bottle and dripped a drop on each candle. Sizzle. A faint fragrance emanated as Audrey's body, heart, and soul seemed to attain tranquility. She drew a breath as she lowered her head in reverence and began chanting the incantation in Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Fingered citron, an herb that belongs to the sun, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Right after Audrey chanted the incantation and hoped to cogitate the contents of her plea, she felt there was a stir within the spirituality wall. She saw a dark red star swirling on the back of her hand. Her heart leaped as she hurriedly closed her eyes and calmed her heart to plead sincerely. When everything was over, she surveyed her surroundings wondrously, but did not find anything odd. Is that all? Audrey knitted her eyebrows slightly as she whispered. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. In the Blue Avenger's captain cabin, Alger Wilson in his windstorm robe was silently reciting the 3 lines of description he had heard in the afternoon. He seemed to be attempting to find clues of the person's identity through it. He shook his head and stood up in a clearly vexed manner, but ultimately did not do anything. Alger was not at ease inside the Blue Avenger, an ancient ship that was a relic from the Tudor dynasty. Although he was already in control of the ship, he had a gut feeling that there were still many hidden secrets, just like the Blood Emperor. Therefore, he planned on using the ship to test the fool's powers but did not wish to attempt the unknown ritualistic magic on the ship. Alger ruminated for a few minutes before leaving the captain's cabin and went on deck. He said to the few sailors, "We will be reaching the Rorstad archipelago soon. We will be anchoring there for a day." The sailors immediately cheered as they shouted in unison, "Thank you, Your Grace." As the ghost ship did not need sailors, there were very few sailors on board. There was no need to worry about their supplies, being able to enjoy fresh food and clean water. However, day after day of voyaging at sea and the nearly unending vistas exhausted them both physically and mentally. It felt like they were always repressed and tolerating something until they lost control. As for the Rorstad archipelago, it was a famous colony on the Sonia Sea. Their business was booming, and they had all kinds of industries. I simply can't wait. A crew member gyrated his hips and sniggered a meaningful laugh that all men would understand. On the public carriage toward Zutland Street, Klein, who was reading the newspapers leisurely, suddenly jolted. He seemed to hear an ethereal voice calling out to him. Shapeless murmurs resounded in his mind as his forehead throbbed uncontrollably. The contents of the calling that could not be heard left as fast as it came. In just 10 seconds, it was gone. Klein pinched his forehead and resisted the throbbing pain deep in his brain. Is this the murmurings of unknown existences that old Neil mentioned? A result of having enhanced spiritual perception? Thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he suddenly saw 4 black dots appear on the back of his right hand. They were like tiny inconspicuous moles. The 4 black dots that stemmed from the luck enhancement ritual quickly sank, dimmed, and vanished. Klein looked at it in surprise and had an additional guess about what had just happened. Justice or the hanged man has attempted the ritualistic magic I gave them? Was my train of thought right? Those 3 descriptions have precisely pointed towards me through the mysterious space above the gray fog? But I'm far from powerful enough. I can't hear the contents of their requests. I wonder if the information is stored above the gray fog. Yes, I should confirm it by entering tonight. Klein felt a little perturbed and agitated. He quickly raised his newspaper and hid his face, preventing anyone from seeing the changes to his expression. Soon, he arrived at Zutland Street and entered the Blackthorn Security Company. Before he could greet Roseanne, Klein saw Captain Dunn Smith walk out. He held a piece of paper with a portrait on it. Take a look at this internal warrant of arrest. A very cruel and vicious beyonder has entered Tingen. Dressed in his black windbreaker, the hatless Dunn swept his gaze over and handed the piece of paper in passing. Klein received it and the first thing that entered his vision was a portrait sketch. The sketch was of boy with a round face. He looked amiable with a tiny hint of bashfulness and was fairly young, probably about 18 or 19 years old. Triss, a suspected beyonder. The initial estimate is that he's a Sequence 8 instigator and we are not eliminating the possibility that the Theosophy Order is behind it. The culprit behind the massacre of the Alfalfa. According to a witness testimony, he came to Tingen after leaving Inmat Harbor. His current whereabouts are unknown. Triss. Alfalfa. It's actually a crime committed by a beyonder? Klein suddenly recalled the dream interpretation from yesterday afternoon and Joyce Meyer's description. He immediately said, "Captain, I know one of the witnesses. He might very well be an important witness." "I know. Joyce Meyer. My help was requested by the machinery hive mind last night. I saw you in Joyce's dream. Many details have led to the confirmation that the Alfalfa tragedy was a result of Triss." Dunn's gray eyes looked unperturbed as he chuckled. "How uninteresting. Captain, thankfully it was my rest day yesterday and not me acting as seer during working hours." Klein lampooned. He barely missed the horror of being caught skiving by his direct superior. He asked instead, which sequence pathway is Instigator? What kind of organization is the Theosophy Order? Was instigating others to kill each other the method Triss used to eliminate the side effects of the potion, or was it a requirement needed to advance? Dunn thought for a few seconds and said, coincidentally, "It's about time for you to learn the relevant information regarding Beyonders and the mysterious organizations. You shouldn't be ordered by old Neil to keep reading the historical documents all the time." "Captain, wasn't the reason for recruiting me to be your history expert?" Klein did not dare point out the problem as he nodded seriously. "All right." Chapter 65, Beyonder Information. With a document signed by Dunn, Klein went underground and turned into the armory. Dunn is right. It's time you understand the different Beyonders and the various secret organizations. Dressed in a black classic robe, old Neil read the note without finding it surprising. Instead, he supported the captain's decision. He then added immediately with a smile, "After all, you will be heading to the underground market with me tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night?" Klein did not conceal his pleasant surprise as he asked to confirm. Old Neil nodded and said with a sigh, "I'm a person who can't sleep when in debt. I always wish to settle them as soon as I can. You did not seem to act so previously. You left it to the last moment before using ritualistic magic to resolve the problem. So, I'm not the only one suffering from procrastination. Wait, is there a need to euphemize, afraid to spend away the money to repay a loan?" Klein did not expose old Neil and instead urged, "Mr. Neil, I'll be troubling you to retrieve the corresponding information from Cheney's Gate." There were mostly archaeological and historical documents in the armory. There were documents involving Beyonders and mysterious organizations, but few in number. Furthermore, they were mostly basic knowledge. Old Neil slowly took a sip from his hand-ground coffee and smacked his lips. He then walked out the armory with the signed and stamped document. Klein watched the place on his behalf. About 10 minutes later, Old Neil returned with a huge stack of documents. "They can only be read in here. They are not to be taken out," he warned as he placed the information on the desk. "All right." Klein gave a firm nod. He extended his hands and quickly flipped through the pages and did a general read-through. Very detailed. As expected of the Nighthawks' internal documents. As expected of a church with 4,000 years history or even more. Klein sighed inwardly as he glanced through the documents. Not only did the documents introduce the various secret organizations, it also listed down many of the sequence pathways. It was very complete. Some of them only wrote the potion name of the corresponding sequence while others only described the Beyonder abilities of the corresponding sequence. Some were completely missing and left blank. While holding back his excitement, Klein found the sequence pathway that led from Seer. He ruffled through the pages and soon found a familiar word. Then, his delighted expression quickly froze because there was no corresponding potion name, sequences 7 and 8, after Seer. Thankfully, the abilities of the two following sequences are present. Klein silently exhaled as he calmed his mind and read the description seriously. Sequence 8, potion name unknown. The corresponding Beyonder is good at fighting with artifice and very crafty. Good at fighting with artifice? This is the next advancement of Seer? Why does it feel odd? I'm not a hunter. Am I going to become a melee mage? What does crafty mean? My intelligence is enhanced, making me good at fooling the enemy? Klein was stunned. He even suspected that the Nighthawks' information was wrong. There were corresponding case studies appended, but he could not find a reasonable explanation despite reading it repeatedly. He cast his gaze lower as the description of sequence 7 entered his eyes. Potion name unknown. The corresponding Beyonder is good at many spells that can be quickly cast. Fuses one's body's skill and supernatural powers as one. That's more like it. This is what an advancement of a seer should sound like. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. After seeing the case studies of sequence 7, he cast his eyes to the overall description of the pathway. This sequence pathway was first established by the Solomon Empire's Zeradal family. During the conflicts of the Fourth Epoch, the family was not fully destroyed. The family's name was occasionally heard in the history of the Fifth Epoch. It is suspected to be connected to the ancient organization, the Secret Order. Zeradal? Upon seeing this name, Klein's eyes constricted. He had just seen this name appear in the remnant diary pages of Emperor Roselle yesterday afternoon. Roselle's acting came from a reminder by the mysterious figure known as Zeradal. Because of that mysterious Zeradal, Emperor Roselle regretted not choosing Seer. Therefore, I was indirectly influenced, turning me into a Seer. It makes acting return to the embrace of the Seer. It feels like it was all predestined. Klein knitted his brows and felt that things were somewhat different. Just from the logical chain, he did not feel that there was anything wrong in any aspect. However, in the domain of mysticism, predestiny often manifested things and involved new problems. In addition, transmigration is quite a baffling matter. It's just confusing. And the guy I've possessed tried to commit suicide because of the lost notebook of the Secret Order. Klein thought for quite a while and had many guesses, but lacked the information needed to prove them. Phew. After repeatedly reading the information, he finally suppressed his ideas and read the other records. He first found the sailor's sequence and discovered that it indeed belonged to the Lord of Storms. For an old opponent that they haven't faced for perhaps more than 2,000 to 3,000 years, the Nighthawks' internal records were rather detailed. Sequence 8, Folk of Rage. Ancient name, Guardian of the Windstorm. The corresponding Beyonder can release several strikes that exceed ordinary thresholds when enraged. Their strength and speed are greatly enhanced. Facing them is like facing a storm. Sequence 7, Seafarer. Ancient name, Windstorm Priest. The corresponding Beyonder is also a scholar of astronomy and geography. They have an intuitive grasp of magnetic fields, ocean currents, wind direction, and clouds. A boat with a seafarer will never get lost at sea. They are even more beloved by the oceans and gain enhancements in every aspect at sea. They are friends of water. They can act freely underwater for more than half an hour. They can cast a limited number of water-related spells. Some are a result of their own capabilities and some are a bestowment from the Lord of Storms. For example, a Sequence 7 seafarer is very powerful. Klein nodded while in deep thought. He suspected that the Hanged Man was a guardian of the windstorm, if not a seafarer. From how he has recently advanced, it was more likely he was the latter. This also indicated in a way that the Hanged Man was either a member of the mandated Punisher or a pirate who had been secretly absorbed by the Church of the Lord of Storms. Impressive. Impressive. Klein flipped back a few pages and found the advancement of Spectator. He discovered that the description was identical to what the Hanged Man had said. Sequence 9 Spectator was like a seer. They lacked direct combat means and could only observe a target to obtain information, gleaning the true thoughts of the target. By doing so, they could provide subtle influences and guidance to cause situations to develop in a way they wish. Sequence 8 Telepathic was the advancement of Spectator. Their observation was not only limited to superficial details, but deeper into one's aura, ether body, or other mysterious domains. The combination of the two allowed a telepathic to precisely understand a person's thoughts as though they could read their minds. In front of them, it was difficult to have any secrets. Sequence 7 Psychiatrist, which was also known as Psyche Analyst, had further enhancements above the Sequence 8 foundations. They could begin directly influencing a target. For instance, they could treat a target's maniacal problems or alternatively, cause them to turn maniacal and lose their reason. A Beyonder that is very difficult to be noticed. After reading the description, Klein made a reasoned judgment. After understanding the relevant information concerning the gathering members, he flipped to the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. This was because Emperor Roselle had chosen their Savant sequence. Sequence 9, Savant. The corresponding Beyonder believes that knowledge is power. They have a rough understanding of the supernatural, but are more knowledgeable about aqua regia, nitroglycerin, and complicated bolts and gears. They seem to know everything. It is no wonder that the Emperor Roselle said that this potion suited him perfectly, allowing for him to press his advantage to the fullest. Klein understood completely as he shifted his eyes down. After several case studies, the corresponding Sequence 8 finally appeared in Klein's vision. Archaeologist. They possess a good deal of knowledge about history and outdoor survival, as well as forbidden knowledge about ruins. They have a strong enough body and ability to face everything. Sequence 7, Appraiser. They can intuitively understand the powers and problems of most extraordinary items, and can use them while keeping danger at its lowest. As Klein's security clearance was insufficient, he only had access to sequence pathways up to 7. It left him a little frustrated, but there was no other way around it. He only wished that Backlund would quickly send over the sealed artifact 2-049 to determine if Ray Bieber was a descendant of the Antigonus family. That way, he would have a chance of becoming a formal member and obtain a higher security clearance. Collecting himself, Klein read the material seriously from cover to cover. He knew that the sequences following Corpse Collector were Gravedigger and Spirit Medium. He also knew that there was no information about the sequence 8 of the mystery prior path. Not only was there no name for the potion, but even the description had been left blank. There was a name for sequence 7 of that path, Warlock. Sounds impressive. Klein slowly flipped the page and saw Apprentice and Marauder, which Emperor Roselle had lingering thoughts for. Their records only reached sequence 8 and nothing more. Sequence 9, Apprentice. Their abilities are rather strange. It can only be confirmed that this is the originating pathway of a mage. They are rarely trapped and very difficult to be stopped. They often are able to escape and pass through obstacles every time. Sequence 8, Trickmaster. They wield all kinds of strange but impotent spells. Sequence 9, Marauder. Difficult to separate these beyonders from ordinary bandits or thieves. Perhaps the means available to them are more impressive, but their goal of stealing riches is not for enjoyment or survival. It's more like answering a calling. Sequence 8, Sequencers. We have also discovered traces of beyonders in fraud investigations. They gain enjoyment from swindling. This is acting in a different form, isn't it? If I had the choice, I might have chosen Apprentice. Klein silently said to himself. Suddenly, he discovered the corresponding sequence potion of the culprit of the Alfalfa tragedy, Triss, Instigator. Chapter 66, Demoness Sect, Sequence 8, Instigator. They are adept at triggering the evil desires deep in people's hearts, causing contradictions and inciting conflict, thus resulting in bloody massacres. The description isn't detailed enough. From the looks of it, the Nighthawks do not understand the capabilities of this potion well enough. But it does match the characteristics of the Alfalfa tragedy. Klein cast his gaze up and read the corresponding sequence 9 for Instigator. Sequence 9, Assassin. Can transform their bodies in a short period of time and become light as a feather. They can also utilize vision equal to that of an eagle. Every assassin is adept at hiding in the shadows. They have dexterous steps and have the ability to release all their strength in one blow. After reading the description, Klein was left completely confused. Assassin. The advancement from Assassin is Instigator? This advancement is just as odd as how a Seer advances to a class that is good at fighting with artifice. Some sequence pathways advance in a very ordinary fashion, such as Spectator. Yet, there are sequence pathways that seem to violate intuition and logic. Well, that might not be completely true. Perhaps I just haven't discovered some of the hidden common points. For instance, assassins and instigators can both bring catastrophe to others. But I can't figure out the advancement of Seer. Hey! Could it be of the Gandalf lineage? After adding some supportive magic, the other attribute points are dumped into strength and techniques? As Klein lampooned in a speechless manner, he silently shook his head. He flipped to the section about the secret organization, the Theosophy Order that involved instigators. Theosophy Order. A secret organization that appeared in the 5th epoch, which is the early era of the current epoch. They believe that the mind is fundamental to a person, while the physical flesh is a cage that restrains the mind. The reason why humans do evil is a result of the physical body's influence. One has to use their spirituality to obtain knowledge, allowing the mind to gradually extricate from the body. Then, through the trials of the stars, they will eventually be separated from the material world, returning to the purest and truest self, obtaining eternal redemption. Therefore, many extremist members of the Theosophy Order will make destroying the bodies of others their goal, which has led to many bloody massacres. It is obvious that they possess two sequence pathways. The first is the more common apprentice and trickmaster potions among their members. The other sequence comprised of assassin and instigator rarely appear. There is currently no evidence that indicates that the Theosophy Order possesses sequence 7 or higher potions. It is unknown how the Theosophy Order established itself. Their possible origins can only be analyzed using the two sequence pathways. Firstly, the apprentice and trickmaster sequences easily remind people of the Abraham family of the Trickmaster dynasty in the 4th epoch. The Tamara family, tied to the Abraham family through marriage for extended periods of time, cannot be eliminated as well. Secondly, assassin and instigator point towards the Demoness sect. The Abraham, Tamara, Antigonus and Zeradal families, the Solomon Empire's Dark Emperor, the Tudor dynasty's Blood Emperor, the Trunsoist Empire, and the Jacob and Ammon families that the Hanged Man had mentioned. There are really lots of secrets buried in the history of the Fourth Epoch. There might be a lot of facts too. Klein was astounded from what he read. He had a deep appreciation for how the history of the Fourth Epoch was clouded in fog. The outline he could see through the fog left him shuddering involuntarily. It was as though he could imagine a thriving era of Beyonders, an epoch with blood and strangeness in a concerted dance or horror and distortion in a symphony. Klein drew in a silent gasp and flipped through the book, but did not discover any corresponding descriptions of the Demoness sect. He looked up and saw old Neil wrestling with some filter paper with his hand-ground coffee. He asked sincerely, "Mr. Neil, what organization is the Demoness sect? I can't find any introduction about them in the documents." Old Neil was in no hurry to respond. After wrestling with his coffee, he chuckled and said, "Your security clearance isn't high enough. Even with Dunn's permission, you would not be able to read the relevant information. It can also be said that a lot of the information is only available in the Holy Cathedral and isn't stored behind Tingen City's Cheney's Gate. Perhaps wait till the day you become a captain of the Nighthawks. You would be sent to the Holy Cathedral for training and would then be able to access them. I do not understand much about the Demoness sect. All I know is that they worship the primordial Demoness. They believe that this secret existence is the true inheritor of the Creator. She was born out of the chaos and was the earliest to be born from the Creator's body. She is also the ultimate ender that ends everything. Their sequence pathways are related to this because to obtain the favor of the primordial Demoness and to approach this secret existence, the upper echelons are all female. This is also why they are called the Demoness sect. Anything else is not something a formal member like me will know. I've heard that the Demonesses make it their mission to spread catastrophes. Spread catastrophes. This does match the hidden commonality of assassin and instigator. But this Mr. Trist's future seems bleak. The subsequent potions seem to be more suited for females. Kleins nodded slightly before he continued reading the information. After he finished reading, he realized that the secret organizations were a lot more than he imagined. But on second thought, he found it very ordinary. After all, this world had so many years of history underlying it. There was once an era when Beyonder powers were extremely active. According to the provided information, Klein categorized the secret organizations into three based on era. First were the ancient organizations born in the Fourth Epoch. They included but were not limited to the Moses Ascetic Order, Secret Order, and the Blood Sanctifies sect, which were followers of the devil. However, the information only mentioned the Demoness sect. The second was the secret organizations early in the Fifth Epoch, the present epoch. For instance, the Theosophy Order or the death-worshipping Numinous Episcopate. There is also the Life School of Thought, which employs a master-disciple heritage, and the Rose School of Thought, known among Beyonders for its bloody sacrifices. The third category were new organizations that appeared in the recent century or two. They include the Aurora Order, the Iron and Blood Cross Order, the Element Dawn, and the Psychology Alchemists, which Klein learned about much earlier. Apart from them, there were other organizations that did not do anything major. Benson and Melissa must have never imagined that the world is so dangerous. It's not only limited to wars. Klein shook his head with a wry smile. He stacked the classified documents neatly before pushing it to old Neil. Meanwhile, he added silently in his heart, "Please don't let my tarot club be on the list." Old Neil never suspected that a leader of a secret organization was sitting opposite to him. He chuckled and took the documents and headed to Cheney's Gate. Klein sat there and wondered if he should divine the location of Instigator Triss. But he abandoned the thought after less than 20 seconds. After all, he only had a vague idea of Triss's appearance and did not know if the name was genuine. If he could figure out his location with that, he would not be a seer, but a prophet. By the time old Neil returned, Klein had straightened his thought processes and continued his revision of mysticism studies to grasp even more forms of ritualistic magic. He spent the day studying and revising. He did not participate in the joint operation needed for capturing Instigator Triss. He did hear that the delivery of sealed artifact 2-049 from Backlund had been delayed due to some reason or another. The actual time of arrival was still pending. As he had earned nearly 2 solely from yesterday's divination, Klein spent 10 pence to buy a 2-liter barrel of Enmat beer for Benson on the way home. He also bought some lemon cakes fresh out of the oven for Melissa. Klein, I know you care for us deeply, but there's no need. There's no need to keep spending money on such matters, said Benson after he saw the tiny barrel of beer and deliberating over his words. Melissa stood beside him and nodded slightly. This is probably how our consumerist habits differ. Klein sighed in amusement. Benson, Melissa, don't worry. This was bought with my additional reimbursement. Yeah, I earn an additional 2 to 4 solely every week. I can't tell them that these are the earnings I got from doing divinations for others, right? He added inwardly. That job of yours is much better than I imagined. Benson was taken aback as he made an objective assessment. That's right. I even learned divination from it. Klein mused silently before turning toward the kitchen. Under the combined efforts of the trio of siblings, a sumptuous dinner was ready for eating. After having their fill, Klein, Benson, and Melissa lay slumped in the living hall. It took them quite a while before they got up to clean up, chat, and study. When Benson and Melissa fall asleep, I'll head above the gray fog to see the effects of the ritual. As Klein revised his history textbooks, he shot a glance at his siblings. Westboro. Iron Cross Street, Lower Street. A 3-storied apartment was immersed in darkness. There were no street lamps or any additional light. Suddenly, a figure leaped out of a window from the 3rd floor. It landed gently on the ground like a feather without causing so much as a stir. His body crouched and suddenly vanished as though he had blended into the shadows. All that could be seen was the outline of his body. As he traveled quickly, the figure arrived at the harbor. He headed for a corner devoid of anything except for a pile of goods. He seriously observed for a moment, circling the area twice before leaving the darkness and entering the corner. One could see his round and amiable face. He was Instigator Triss, who had single-handedly caused the tragedy of the alfalfa. How does it feel? A mysterious figure wearing a black hooded robe walked out of the shadows. The hoarse voice obviously belonged to a woman. Triss revealed a friendly and satisfied smile. Feels great. It was a scene I dreamed and yearned for. I think I have appropriately completed the mission and have taken the necessary preparations for the advancement. The black-robed woman nodded indiscernibly and said, Very well. According to the promise, I'll hand you the Sequence 7 formula and the 3 main ingredients. You will have to gather the rest by yourself. No problem. Triss answered, seemingly prepared. The mysterious woman raised her hand and handed a book-like object to Triss. The book had an ancient and mottled bronze exterior cover with a strange star-shaped lock on its side. Triss knew that inside the book was the formula and ingredients. He instantly became thrilled. He tried hard to compose himself as he looked curiously at the potion's name on the bronze outer cover. Witch! Triss exclaimed. He found it unbelievable that the word written in ancient Hermes was, witch. Witch? I'll advance to become a witch? What a joke. The mysterious woman covered her mouth and let out a chortle. It took her quite some time before she answered, Weren't you always curious? Curious about why our upper echelons are all female. That is the answer. Chapter 67. Response. The crimson moon high in the sky hung silently in the darkness. It illuminated Tingen City, the city of universities, as it gradually fell silent. Klein stood in front of his desk and looked through his oriel windows to see the empty Daffodil Street. He heard the sound of carriages quickly galloping far away without causing a din. He picked up his vine-leaf-patterned silver pocket watch and snapped it open. He took a glance at it and drew the curtains, making the yellowish lights of the gas lamp reflect back into the bedroom. Klein turned around at an adequate speed, locked his room, and switched off the gas valve. The room was immediately covered in darkness. Only a sliver of red moonlight penetrated the curtains. It gave rise to an atmosphere perfect for many late-night folk tales. Klein took out the silver knife he had applied for. He imagined the spherical light and entered a half-cogitation state. He focused his mind according to his previous practice, allowing his spirituality to spew out from the tip of his blade. Then, he allowed their motion to miraculously fuse with his surroundings, sealing off the room. He was doing it to prevent any abnormal stirrings that could wake Benson and Melissa. Following that, Klein put down the knife and walked 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner. Every step was accompanied by the incantation from Earth. The unchanging roars and murmurs inundated him. With the same mania and pain inflicted on him, he did his best to control himself and withstood the most grueling and dangerous stage in his half-conscious state. The grayish-white fog was endless. The dark red stars were at varying distances from him. The towering divine palace stood erect like a dead giant. Nothing seemed to have changed. The silence and antiquity that had accumulated over thousands of years swarmed him. No, there is a change. Klein silently muttered to himself. His gaze locked onto a dark red star near him. That was the star symbolizing justice. The star's deep redness began to pulse. It did so with average amplitude, but did not stop. Klein carefully spread out his spirituality towards the deep redness. The moment the two made contact, he felt a hum in his head. He saw a blurry and distorted scene and heard the illusory but stacked voice of prayers. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. I pray for you to give me a good dream. I pray for you to give me a good dream. The female voice resounded constantly in an intermittent fashion. Klein's psyche turned more irritable and chaotic. It was akin to listening to someone upstairs pounding on the floor when he had just fallen asleep. He repressed his emotions and used cogitation to calm the urge. He carefully discerned the blurry scene that appeared before him. It was a girl dressed in white robes. She had a head of beautiful golden hair. She was standing before 4 flickering flames, her head lowered as she kept chanting. From the distorted image, Klein barely recognized her to be Miss Justice. At this point, he confirmed that the ritual incantation he had created could precisely point towards the gray fog, towards him. This gave him a huge sense of achievement, going from nothing to having something. I won't praise myself for being awesome. Klein's mood turned for the better. He felt that the pleading voice that echoed in his ears like a buzzing fly was now acceptable. With a thought, he attempted to create a response in his mind, transferring it through the intricate connection to the dark red star. I'm aware. The gray layer emanated before him. A distorted and blurry figure stood in the deepest depths. The spot where his eyes ought to be swirled with deep redness as his voice resounded repeatedly in the vast and empty world. I'm aware. I'm aware. I'm aware. Audrey Hall was jolted awake suddenly. She sat up with her blanket wrapped around her as her mind was fully occupied with the scenes she saw in her dream. She knew very well that she had dreamed of the fool, the mysterious being that lived above the fog. Is this a response to my morning prayers? Audrey, who quickly entered her spectator state, calmed down and analyzed. Although she did not understand why the fool did not respond on the spot and only did so at night, she was still shocked that the ritualistic magic was effective with the few lines of incantation. In the past, she had prayed to the Evernight goddess, but had never received any response. Even if Mr. Fool was not a god, he is likely not far from being one. Audrey slowly inhaled before slowly exhaling. Since he was a powerful existence that she had no means of resisting, she quickly threw aside her worries. She began considering what to do next. First, I have to completely digest the spectator potion. My acting is still pretty good. Second, I have to seek out the psychology alchemists. Third, I should try to obtain the telepathist potion formula from Mr. Fool or clues regarding the psychology alchemists elsewhere. However, every godlike existence should have a complete sequence pathway that belongs to them. They might not know the formulas of other sequence pathways. A new Beyonder organization like the psychology alchemists might not be able to garner Mr. Fool's attention. With the connection severed, Klein sat at the bronze table's seat of honor in a rather good mood. He was completely covered in gray fog. He leaned back and clenched his fist to cover his mouth. He recalled and analyzed the process. At that moment, he was the only living being in the world of the gray fog. Apart from that, there was absolute silence. It seems I can only pass information over and am unable to use the powers in here. From the looks of it, my idea of manipulation would not work. Klein kept prodding his mouth as he silently made a conclusion. He had originally planned on attempting to bind his body with the world of the gray fog in the same manner if the incantation and ritual proved effective. As such, he could then leverage all the power of this mysterious space. If that happened, he could pray to himself, and through such a manipulative manner, he could go around the limitations, the mysteries, and the danger, allowing him to fully use the gray fog world. For example, he could first conduct a ritual and pray to himself for spells. Following that, he could come above the gray fog and answer his own request and bestow it. From the looks of it, I was being too idealistic. My understanding and control of the gray fog world has not reached that level. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner and planned on leaving. At that moment, he saw the dark red star that represented the hanged man begin to pulse. He heard an ethereal and formless voice spread out. I coincidentally chanced upon the hanged man's ritual? Klein nodded in thought. He sat at the seat of honor of the long bronze table and extended his hand to tap on the star. His spirituality spread as it touched the pulsing deep redness. He heard the hanged man's heavy and repeated prayers along with a blurry scene. The hanged man was draped in a pure black robe in the scene. He stood in front of 4 plumes of fire. The surrounding spirituality had formed a wall, isolating him from any external influence. Klein did not immediately respond. All he did was watch and listen silently. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, I pray for your help. After the hanged man finished his prayer, he waited for a while. Seeing that there was no response, he began dismantling the spirituality wall, extinguished the candles, and tidied up the altar. Finally, he swiped his extended hand as aqueous light spread out, making the altar table look brand new. Water-based spell. The bestowment of the storm. The hanged man is indeed at least a seafarer. Klein nodded slightly. Before the scene vanished, he responded via the method he imagined, transmitting it through the blob of dark redness. Alger Wilson was situated in the Rorsted Archipelago's city of generosity. He had not gone with the sailors to the famous Red Cabaret. Instead, he stayed inside the hotel and sealed the door and windows shut to attempt the ritual the fool had described. After familiarly finishing the prayer, Alger waited patiently for a moment, but did not receive any response. It seems this attempt isn't too successful. Mr. Fool needs to change methods. He was both overjoyed, but also a little disappointed. After everything was done, Alger planned on going downstairs for a bottle of Langsky Proof, alcohol that could aid a folk of rage to unleash his powers. Mandated punishers of the Lord of Storms were rather fond of this sort of beverage. Pulling open the door, Alger was about to walk out when his vision blurred. He saw gray fog billow in the corridor and a hazy human figure sitting in the deepest depths of the fog, as if on a high throne. I'm aware. The familiar deep voice reverberated around Alger's ears, causing him to freeze where he stood as his head slightly throbbed in pain. Alger's eyes suddenly turned dark. He looked around but realized that nothing had changed. There was still the same squeaky floorboard, the same aged wall candle stands, and the same unclean corridor. I'm aware. The voice was still resounding by Alger's ears. His expression sank as he hit his chest lightly with his fist but did not say any words of respect to the Lord of Storms. After a long silence, Alger's expression was restored to normal, but his gaze seemed deeper. Klein did not spend too much time above the gray fog. When all the remnant voices returned to normal, he enveloped himself in his spirituality and plunged into the gray fog, plummeting into the material world. The lights before him flew by rapidly, like the scenes of a movie played back at a speed tens of times faster than normal. After Klein felt faint, he saw curtains that let crimson moonlight through along with the blurry outlines of the desk and bookshelf. He picked up the silver knife again and removed the spirituality wall in the room. Then, a sudden gust of wind opened the door and went through the corridor. He was completely relieved when he saw that there were no stirrings from Benson's or Melissa's room. This luck enhancement ritual is really indispensable for traveling. It's concealed and mystical. Klein silently murmured and closed the door again, walking towards his bed. His mission tomorrow was to head to the underground markets for Beyonder items with Old Neil. Chapter 68, Monster at Dusk. The setting sun cast long shadows of the carriages and horses. Having informed Benson and Melissa that he was having dinner at the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein headed to the harbor with Old Neil on a public carriage. He was dressed in cheap formal attire, afraid that conflict might break out in such a complicated location. If he damaged his tuxedo, which he took painstaking care of, he would probably cry his heart out. When the sunlight appeared to turn fiery, the carriage stopped. Old Neil, in his usual classic black robe and felt black hat with a rounded edge, ignored the gazes of others and walked diagonally to the Evil Dragon bar in ahead of them. Even though the bar was slightly far away and the heavy doors were tightly shut, Klein still heard wave after wave of rapturous shouts. They appeared to be cheering on a hero. When he came close, he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head towards the warehouse opposite to the bar. He saw a stocky man dressed in a uniform standing at a hidden corner on the rooftop. The man carried a huge grayish-white mechanical box and held a thick rifle in his hand. The grayish-white mechanical box was obviously connected to the same colored rifle via piping. Steam-pressured rifle? Klein muttered in shock. He looked at Old Neil and said, "This bar can actually obtain such weapons?" That was a military-controlled item. Although it used extracted phlogiston, the size and weight of the steam backpack were still shocking, something only a true warrior of blood and iron could withstand. The rifle had an extremely high muzzle velocity and shocking destructive power too. Matched with a suitable scope, it was nearly equivalent to an inferior sniper rifle. What? Old Neil squinted his eyes as he looked over, having a confused look too. Did something happen here? Something happened? Klein surveyed his surroundings and discovered a few more men holding repeating rifles who were searching for something. What happened? Old Neil approached the bar and asked the brawny man guarding its door outside. The brawny man obviously knew Old Neil and smiled wryly. The bar was nearly destroyed earlier. Apparently a wanted man was here trying to buy materials and was recognized. And this was what resulted from it. Oh Lord, what did he do, and how dangerous was he to receive such treatment? My legs went limp seeing all those firearms, limper than after spending an entire night with Ginger Sunny. He did not know the identity of the wanted man, much less know that the people who came to buy materials had Beyonders mixed in. Wanted man? Do you know his name? Old Neil asked in interest. I think it was Triss or something, the brawny man answered uncertainly. Instigator Triss? Klein nodded in enlightenment, having understood what was happening. Triss did not know that Joyce Meyer had cast his suspicion on him, therefore, he had sauntered right into the market to purchase materials without heed. He was likely recognized by an informant of either the machinery hive mind or the Nighthawks, resulting in an intense clash. Was he caught? Klein tapped his silver-inlaid black cane. Based on the surrounding situation, likely not. The brawny man shook his head slightly and gestured with his chin to the rooftop of the warehouse opposite him. He rushed out before those terrifying guys arrived. Bloody hell, I've never seen a man run faster than he did. You haven't seen the true skills of an assassin, or you might be taken away to some indescribable place for further re-education. Klein thought. Is the market still open? Old Neil changed subjects and asked. It just restored operations, replied the brawny man affirmatively. That's great. Old Neil quickened his pace and extended his right hand, pushing open the heavy door. Klein followed closely in tow and walked in. He nearly fainted at the stuffiness and smell of alcohol that inundated him. In the middle of Evil Dragon Bar was a boxing ring. Two half-naked men were in an intense brawl, and surrounding them were dozens of customers shouting and cheering on the side they supported with no lack of vulgarities. Old Neil ignored them and led Klein around the boxing ring and walked into a billiard room at the back. In the billiard room, there were two people holding cue sticks, having a casual conversation. When they saw Old Neil enter, they instantly fell silent for a few seconds. After confirming the visitor's identity, they moved aside and let Old Neil and Klein pass through the secret door behind them. After passing through a few rooms, the sight before Klein's eyes opened up. He saw a place that was about the size of a lecture hall from his previous life. Some vendors had set up roadside stalls with bottles and cans all over. Passers-by strolled through them, either scrutinizing their goods, chatting, or comparing prices. They have to give 5% of their profits to Swain. Ah, he is the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, former captain of a mandated Punisher squad and older than I am. He's someone who wishes to drink himself to his death, Old Neil explained in a garrulous manner. Klein thought and gave an honest evaluation. A rather profitable business. After all, his only expense was providing the venue and protection. If any item catches your fancy but you lack the money, you can borrow from Swain. But of course, he charges a very high interest. Old Neil trailed off as he gnashed his teeth. As expected, it's like running a casino, they would provide usuries. Klein held his walking stick and looked around as he asked curiously, Mr. Swain is a seafarer? The captain of a mandated Punisher squad was likely a Sequence 7. No, he is only a folk of rage. Tingen is not a coastal city, so the Church of the Goddess is much more powerful than Lord of Storms here. Old Neil scoffed. Actually, Swain had the chance of becoming a seafarer, but was afraid that he would lose control, so he chose to give up. Just as Klein was about to ask if the boss of the bar had any experience of nearly losing control, he suddenly felt a strange phenomenon happen on his left. There appeared to be something hidden there, muttering and recounting. Klein turned his head and saw a pale young man. He was wearing an old linen shirt and blue jeans that the working class normally wore. His eyes looked demoralized with a hint of craziness, and he was constantly mumbling. His spiritual perception is very high, or perhaps, distorted. Klein creased his eyebrows and muttered. It was the young man's spiritual perception that triggered his own spiritual perception. Generally speaking, spiritual perception sensing something causes some interaction. It was nearly impossible to conceal it from others, but others referred to spirit mediums who had cast their abilities, as well as powerful figures with similar special traits. A beyonder like Klein would actually find it hard to detect, only detecting if one's spiritual perception reached a certain heightened level, or an abnormal distortion happened. They made eye contact and the pale young man with messy black hair walked towards him with an expression looking as though he was half sleepwalking and half insane. He stopped before Klein and stared at him. Suddenly, he guffawed. Huh, it's the smell of death, death. Ah. Before he was done talking, he suddenly screamed tragically. His eyes shut tightly as liquid with the color of blood flowed out. Ah. Darn it. The young man covered his eyes and hugged his head. He struggled on the ground and only calmed down after a while. He then lay there panting. During the entire process, not a single customer or stall vendor looked over. Klein pressed down his top hat and looked at Old Neil. Klein's mouth was hanging open in shock, using his actions to demonstrate his shock and to request for advice. Don't mind him. He's Adamasol, an orphan, nicknamed Monster. He was born with high spiritual perception, and he has always been able to see things that he shouldn't. hear voices that he shouldn't. Hence, he is always raving and often getting hurt. Old Neil shook his head as he explained. He could tell that my body was once dead. Klein knitted his eyebrows and lowered his voice as he asked in doubt, haven't the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind ever thought of taking him in? No, we do not have the sequence potion that suits him, said old Neil with a sigh. Right, he was born with the starting point of half a sequence. Klein asked again curiously, what sequence pathway suits him? The sequence 9 that suits him is called Monster. His nickname came from there. It's a pity that only the life school of thought has control over the sequence pathways beginning, old Neil replied softly. He tried to keep the conversation between him and Klein from the people around them to avoid leaking information to mysticism aficionados. Life school of thought? Klein recalled the information he had previously read. The secret organization appeared in the beginning of the current epoch. Its actual origins were unknown, but it was mainly passed down via master and disciple. Their theories and beliefs were hardly known. Klein only knew that they separated the world into 3 layers, the definite rational world, also known as the absolute truth world, the spirit's world, and the material world. Rumor had it that the secret organization had once produced a soothsayer. Wasn't that a sequence pathway that corresponded to Seer? Confusing, really confusing. Klein shook his head and saw Adamasol struggle to get up and then wander off to another corner. He reorganized his thoughts and followed behind old Neil. They walked past one stall after another. There were plants like moonflower, fingered citron, night vanilla, and mineral resources like silver, topaz, ruby and so on. It's really very well equipped, Klein muttered softly. The mysticism aficionados of all ages and genders around him would be stopping, distinguishing, or talking at times. It gave the area a bustling vibe. Walk around on your own. I am going to settle my bill. Old Neil pointed at one of the 2 rooms at the end. All right. Klein nodded without thought. He strolled with his black cane and came before a stall which sold self-made amulets. He took a careful look at it for a while. Just when Klein prepared to speak with the seller, he suddenly heard someone asking the stall behind him, is this powder ground from cow teeth pianol? Cow teeth pianol? Isn't that one of the supplementary ingredients of the spectator potion? Klein thought, then turned around to look at the inquirer. Justice had repeated the formula for the potion several times, so Klein had been left with a remarkably clear impression of the ingredients. Chapter 69, Protection Amulet. Klein looked over and saw the person inquiring about the cow teeth pianol. The man was less than a meter away from him. He was wearing a black suit and a half-top hat of the same color. He had a cane adorned with silver in his hand and a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. He had a refined bearing. Yes, do you need it? This can here costs 3 solii. The owner of the stall was wearing a long black robe, one filled mysticism traits. The inquirer, whose sideburns were pale yellow, thought for a moment before saying, can it be cheaper? I still need to buy other ingredients too. For example, this bottle of white-edged sunflower petals. The stall owner considered for a few seconds before grudgingly replying, 2 solii and 6 pence. I don't think you can find a price cheaper than that. Klein immediately felt that he was overthinking things after seeing how the bespectacled man was buying ingredients other than the cow teeth pianol. However, he still tapped his glabella twice as an act of caution. He swept the man with his spirit vision. No problems. He looks very healthy. His emotions are all right too. Mister, you need to keep this up. Klein retracted his gaze, turned around, and looked at the stall selling homemade amulets once again. The amulets were placed neatly before him. Some of them were made of pure silver, some with steel, others forged from gold. But only a few of the amulets had a weak aura emanating from them, some crimson, some pale white, some golden. This meant that some of them had weak traces of spirituality and were definitely effective to a certain extent. Klein looked at the amulets carefully and confirmed that the stall owner making the amulets had some foundation in mysticism. The stall owner did not make any mistakes matching the different energy sources to the different incantations. He was also extremely accurate at choosing the materials that corresponded to the different energy sources. Of course, a mere mysticism aficionado would definitely make some mistakes. Klein noticed that the stall owner did not fully understand the incantations. One could not create an incantation simply by translating the content of the prayer into Hermes. The incantations had to follow a certain format that followed unique rules. The other problem was that the stall owner had made mistakes of varying degrees when he was choosing a suitable symbol for the energy sources. That explained why there were only 2 or 3 amulets releasing the faint light out of the dozens that were laid before him. As for how much of an effect the 2 to 3 amulets would have, Klein could only say that it was better than nothing. An amulet that was truly equipped with obvious effects needed the craftsman to release his spirituality from a blade while carving the incantations and symbols. If one wanted even better results, they would have to supplement it with ritualistic magic. And these 2 things were not something an ordinary person could achieve. Klein tapped his glabella twice, then pointed at the upper left corner of the stall with his black cane. How much for these 2? He did not ask about the amulets that had a rudimentary colored aura, but half-completed items. Other than external shape, they had not been carved with incantations or symbols. To Klein, there was no reason to purchase the amulets that had weak effects. What he wanted to do was to transform the half-completed amulets into true amulets. I'll make amulets that can protect a person from danger, 1 each for Benson and Melissa. As for my own, I can ask the Nighthawks to supply me with the ingredients. Man, I must have been influenced by old Neil. I don't feel any guilt when doing something like that. Klein's mind wandered as he watched the stall owner pick up the half-completed silver amulets. The first silver amulet was elongated and had a cavity in the middle. Around it were patterns of angel-like feathers. The craftsmanship was intricate and was very beautiful. The other was simple, almost completely devoid of any additional decorations or carvings. It had a vertical line representing the night, and a circle representing the crimson moon. Klein, who paid much attention to appearances, took a liking to them immediately. This is 6 soli, the middle-aged stall owner said, pointing to the intricate amulet. He was a man of few words. After pausing for a while, he rubbed the simpler piece and said, "This is 5 soli 3 pence. That's too expensive. They are still far from being an amulet." Klein had slowly been influenced by Benson and Melissa, so he had begun cultivating the habit of haggling. After a battle of words, he bought the 2 silver accessories at 5 soli 6 pence and 4 soli 9 pence respectively. Yeah, they can only be considered silver accessories for the time being. Klein had that in mind. The 10 soli 3 pence was deducted from the reimbursement he received for his divination club membership. Klein received the 2 silver accessories and placed them into his pocket. He was about to head to another stall when he heard a gentle voice. "Sir, why are you not buying a completed amulet?" Klein turned his head over and found a teenage girl asking him the question. She was about 15 years of age and wore a lacy yellow dress while holding onto a veiled hat with a ribbon. "It's because I intend to make my own amulets." As you know, that is the wish of every aficionado of mysticism, Klein minced his words and answered. He did not wish to make the stall owner think that he was trying to snatch his business, even though he had considered using his skill to earn a quick buck. The teenage girl had naturally curly brown hair, and her face was adorable due to her baby fat. She looked at Klein with her light blue eyes and asked sincerely, "Can I seek your advice on choosing an amulet?" "Well, I was introduced here by a friend. I've been here several times and have a deep interest in mysticism. But I still do not know too much about it, and she, my friend, is going to turn 16 soon. I wish to select an amulet as a gift to her. I didn't bring her along as I wanted to be a surprise. I had previously sought her advice, but I cannot remember a lot of the critical points." Klein gave a gentlemanly smile. "What kind of protection amulets are you looking for? Something to avert disasters? Something to avoid illnesses? Something that gives fortune?" Different requirements would require different energy sources, which means that they must point to different gods. Different gods would have different corresponding constellations, and the different constellations would mean that different materials have to be used. For example, the incantation for averting disasters would belong to the Empress of Disaster and Horror, who is the Evernight goddess. As mysticism aficionados, we all know that the symbol of the Evernight goddess is the moon. The corresponding metal would thus be pure silver. Therefore, if we hope to avert disasters, it is best that we choose an amulet that is made of pure silver and has the corresponding incantations. We would also have to make sure that the incantations are of the correct language and format. The corresponding symbol of the Empress of Disaster and Horror means the path number, the spell's characteristic, and the relative positions of the symbols, etc., must also be correct. But this is too complicated, and there's no need for me to explain this for you. Klein added inwardly. The girl's eyes sparkled. She asked with a little doubt, can a follower of the goddess wear an amulet belonging to another god? No problem. The gods do not mind such small matters, Klein consoled her. It was not a problem for the person wearing the amulet, but the person creating the amulet had to be careful. If a believer of the Lord of Storms were to craft an amulet of the eternal blazing sun, they would most likely receive something malicious. Of course, these referred to amulets requiring the aid of ritualistic magic. The craftsman need not pay much attention to this otherwise. The teenage girl heaved a sigh of relief. I hope to get her an amulet for good health. Which deity should I choose from? The eternal blazing sun, Mother Earth, or the god of knowledge and wisdom? There should be no problem with the eternal blazing sun and Mother Earth. The former is represented by the sun while the latter is represented by the brown star. Klein smiled as he said, the material of the sun is gold, while the metal that symbolizes the brown star is lead. I would suggest the sun, but I do not know if you brought enough money along with you. The reason for his suggestion was because he had noticed that among the 3 amulets with a rudimentary spiritual glow, one of them was a health amulet that came under the domain of the sun. Isn't this? Before the teenage girl finished her sentence, she stopped and warily looked at the stall owner who was waiting silently. She thought for a moment before asking, after I decide on the material, how should I distinguish the incantation and corresponding symbols? Do you know Hermes? Klein asked instead. I just started learning it, the teenage girl replied, a little embarrassed. Then let me choose it for you. Klein pointed at the health amulet made of gold and said, this one has no problems, be it in the incantations or the representing symbol. The teenage girl lifted the edges of her dress and squatted in front of the amulet. She picked up the health amulet with designs of the sun's rays around its edges. She felt as though the amulet was nourishing her, making her feel completely relaxed. Thank you, thank you. She stood up and curtsied in gratitude. Klein laughed and said, I'll leave the rest to you and the stall owner. I have other things to tend to. He looked at the stall owner as he spoke and noticed that the man had a weird look in his eyes, as if deciding if he had to give a cut of the profit to Klein. With a smile, Klein did not bother with the matter anymore. He continued touring the underground market, but he didn't notice any true extraordinary materials. At this point, old Neil had already paid off his debt. He was holding a dark-colored wooden box in his hands. He pointed to the other room behind and said after he noticed Klein's look of doubt, go there if you wish to buy or sell extraordinary materials. After all, no one wishes to let others know what extraordinary items they are purchasing. I understand. Klein nodded as though in thought. There was no need for him to go there for the time being. He headed toward the exit of the underground market together with old Neil. How much for these elf flowers? A query suddenly entered Klein's ears. Elf flowers. That's also an ingredient for the spectator potion. Klein thought as he glanced sideways. He once again saw the refined bespectacled man. What's the matter? Old Neil asked curiously. Nothing much. Klein retracted his gaze. Although he was a quasi-member of the Nighthawks, he did not feel that all Beyonders had to be absorbed by the churches or locked up. He believed that it had to depend on the situation. Spectators definitely posed little danger to society or the kingdom, and the chances of losing control as a Sequence 9 were very slim. After leaving Evil Dragon Bar, Klein and Old Neil took a public carriage and left the harbor. They then split ways at the North Borough and headed back to their respective homes. The public transport steered into Daffodil Street and stopped by the side of the road. Klein was about to get off the carriage and he suddenly saw a young lady wearing a grayish-white dress about to board the carriage. This lady had smooth black hair, her face a little round. She had thin eyes and unassuming features. But paired together, she gave off the feeling that she was sweet and gentle. Klein noticed her not because of her beauty, but because he discovered that her body was shuddering slightly. It was an unnatural shudder. "Miss, are you all right?" Klein asked in concern. The young lady shook her head abruptly. "No, I am just too tired." The people behind Klein were urging for him to get off, so Klein could only leave the carriage. When he found his footing, he paid attention to the situation from before again. He pinched his glabella twice, planning to determine if the lady was indeed all right. He had the intention of sending her to the hospital if she had a serious illness that was going to act up soon. Activating his spirit vision, the colors of the auras started to surface. Klein turned around and prepared to look at the sweet and gentle young lady. Chapter 70, 2-049's Arrival. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The horses widened their paces as the wheels began rolling in tow. Despite activating his spirit vision and turning around, hoping to observe the refined and sweet lady, Klein did not have his wishes fulfilled. All his eyes reflected were brown figures moving past him. Meanwhile, the passengers from the stop had already boarded the carriage. The carriage door was closed tightly as it gradually departed. Within the carriage, 20 to 30 people stood closely to each other, their energy fields overlapping and shielding each other. Hence, it was an explosion of colors in Klein's vision, making it difficult for him to differentiate. He shook his head quietly and raised his finger to tap his glabella to deactivate his spirit vision. To him, it was simply help he could provide if he happened to chance upon it. However, if he were to miss it, and the situation was not especially clear, there was no point taking it to heart and delaying his own matters. While bathing in the crimson moonlight, Klein strolled back home on the still bustling Daffodil Street. He returned to see Melissa sitting beside the dining table. She was busy doing her homework under a bright gas lamp. She bit at the fountain pen and frowned, appearing deep in thought. "Where's Benson?" Klein asked casually. Melissa looked up. She blanked out for a few seconds before saying, "He said he went around a few boroughs today and was covered in sweat. He's taking a nice relaxing bath." "All right." Klein chuckled. Suddenly, he realized that she was wearing a dress he had never seen before. It was entirely beige in color. It had fashionable engagiantes. The collar and edges of her top had thin frills. Apart from that, it was a rather simple design, the type one wore as daily casual clothing. It fully accentuated the youth of a 16 or 17-year-old. "New dress?" Klein asked with a smile. It was a purchase that he and Benson had insisted upon. Melissa answered in the affirmative tersely. "I just took it back from Mrs. Rochelle. I was thinking that since I had to wash it later, I might as well try it on first." Klein was rather puzzled when he heard that. "Mrs. Rochelle? Wasn't she our former neighbor?" Melissa nodded and explained in all seriousness, "Mrs. Rochelle is actually a seamstress, but she was quite unlucky. She had no choice but to sew and mend clothes for others at home. She leads a pretty tough life. I knew that she had pretty good skill and the price she quoted is cheaper than at a women's clothing store. Furthermore, it's very well tailored to my figure, so I ordered a new skirt from her. It only cost 9 soldi and 5 pence and took only a few days. A dress of a similar style would cost 3/2 of a pound at Harrods department store. What a frugal girl. Sis, I know that at least half the reason is due to your pity of Mrs. Rochelle." Klein did not reproach Melissa for deciding things for herself. Instead, he said with a smile, "When did you go to Harrods?" "That was at House Street, near the Divination Club. It was somewhere where the middle class shopped." Melissa was momentarily at a loss for words. It took her a long while before she said, "It was Selena and Elizabeth. They insisted I accompany them. Actually, well, I actually prefer gears more. I like places with steam and machinery. Yeah. It's quite, well, nice for a girl to occasionally shop at a department store." Klein laughed as he comforted his sister. After some idle talk, he briskly walked to the second floor, hoping to wash away the repulsive mixed smells from the bar. Just as he was about to return to his bedroom to get a change of clothes, he suddenly heard sounds coming from the bathroom close to the balcony. A few seconds later, Benson stepped out while drying his gradually receding hairline. "How was it? Did you compliment Melissa's new dress?" He shot a glance at Klein and asked with a smile. "I guess I forgot." "All I did was ask where it was done," Klein thought for a moment as he said. Benson immediately chortled and shook his head. How unbecoming of an elder brother. When Melissa received the dress, she couldn't bear putting it down. After rushing to cook and wash the dishes, she immediately wore the dress and has refused to take it off ever since. Wasn't she planning on changing after showering? She can wash and starch the clothes while doing so. Klein subconsciously refuted with the explanation that Melissa had given. Tisk. Benson sighed. It's been scorching the past few days. She was busy in the kitchen for a long time, so I believe she would feel much better doing her homework after a shower. That's right. Klein was suddenly enlightened as he gave his brother a knowing smile. So that's what kind of person you are, Melissa. There's nothing wrong with a girl caring for her appearance. There's no need to find excuses. The corners of his mouth curved up as he shook his head gently before walking into his bedroom. While he was showering, Klein faintly heard knocking downstairs. He immediately wondered. Doesn't the worker who's in charge of collecting coins for the gas meter come only once every 2 weeks? Could it be Mrs. Shoud from next door? That can't be. It's said that this lady strictly abides by the etiquette of middle-class society. She would not visit at an inappropriate time. In his puzzlement, Klein wiped dry his body. Wearing old but comfortable shirt and trousers, he came down the stairs. He surveyed the area but did not notice any strangers. He asked, "Was someone at the door just now?" Benson, who was reading the newspapers casually, said with a smile, "It was Bitch Mountbatten, one of the policemen in charge of Iron Cross Street. He asked if we met an 18 or 19-year-old boy who has a rotund face. Heh, he even gave us a sketch to identify. Unfortunately, neither one of us have seen him, or we would have received a reward. What about you?" Nope. Klein had a general idea what was happening. Instigator Triss had successfully escaped the evil dragon bar at the harbor. He had escaped somewhere close to Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street, therefore, the police were making visits from door to door. And to go this far made it clear that the operation of nabbing the instigator had completely failed. Klein did not bother himself with the situation. He had yet to begin combat training. He only had basic mastery of shooting, so to consider dealing with a natural assassin was simply using his life as a joke. He did not sleep well that night. He kept worrying that the instigator would infiltrate their house to hide, causing another massacre. Thankfully, Daffodil Street was quiet the entire night, with the morning sun rays dispersing all the fog. The relaxed Klein changed into formal attire, wore his top hat, held his cane, and went all the way to Zutland Street. He greeted Roseanne at the reception hall. "Good morning, Klein," replied Roseanne happily. She suppressed her voice and said, "I heard the huge operation last night failed." "The operation to nab Instigator Triss?" Klein asked in curiosity. "Yeah." Roseanne nodded heavily. She shot a glance at the partition and said, "Apparently an informant of the mandated punishers discovered the instigator at the harbor. They were planning on waiting for additional Beyonders and another special operations squad from the police to arrive before beginning the operation to do the deed instantly without alarming the commoners. Unfortunately, that instigator was extremely sharp. He charged out of the encirclement when he noticed something amiss, successfully escaping as a result. At such times, they need a Beyonder with tracking abilities, such as me. Klein made a joke. There was no lack of trackers back then. Dunn Smith's voice suddenly sounded. Roseanne turned her head abruptly and saw the captain wearing his black windbreaker. He was glaring right at her with his deep pair of gray eyes while leaning against the partition's frame. She hurriedly raised her hands to cover her mouth. Then, she shook her head incessantly, expressing her futile innocence. Dunn turned his gaze to Klein and after some thought, he said, there were a total of 6 Beyonders from the mandated Punishers, the Machinery Hive Mind, and us Nighthawks. We traced the injured Triss to Iron Cross Street's Lower Street. We found his temporary residence, but the clues ended there. Be it Beyonder methods or ordinary investigations, nothing worked. It was as though he evaporated into thin air, disappearing completely. Do you need my help with divination? Klein asked probingly. Dunn shook his head gently. The Machinery Hive Mind had a Machinery Hive Mind. He is a senior Beyonder as good as old Neil. I even suspect that he's already at Sequence 8. I'm just unaware what the name of the corresponding potion is. The Theosophy Order's heritage to this day must have something special about it, consoled Klein. For the rest of the morning, he continued his mysticism curriculum, read the historical information and documents, and practiced various techniques just like always. With lunchtime almost approaching, Klein's mind began to wander. Another few minutes later, he put away the documents, having heard the summoning of his stomach. At that moment, Dunn Smith came into the clerk office. He said in a deep but mild manner, Klein, follow me to Cheney's Gate. Sealed artifact 2-049 has arrived. The subsequent operation might require your sensing of that notebook. All right, Klein got up and replied. His thoughts became scrambled. He imagined how the sealed item would look or if the operation would be dangerous. While in this rather tense silence, he followed Dunn down the stairs and into the tunnel. After going straight at the intersection, Dunn suddenly stopped and turned his head, saying sternly, do this action together with me. Keep doing it and absolutely do not stop. Remember, absolutely do not stop. This is for your own safety. While speaking, Dunn bent his arm followed by extending it. He repeated this action without stopping. Klein looked at the captain demonstrate in a befuddled manner. Suddenly enlightened, he asked, has this got to do with the uniqueness of the sealed artifact? Yes. Dunn nodded with abnormal seriousness. Repeating such an action will allow us to discover if anything happens to you immediately. Saving you in time will not result in any life-threatening dangers. Okay. Klein did not hesitate further as he began the repeated action of bending and extending his arm. If your arm is sore, use the other one, added Dunn. Sealed artifact 2-049 sure is odd. What meaning does this action have? It seems very dangerous. These thoughts flashed past Klein's mind as he looked solemnly at the captain. All right. He had too many questions on his mind, but since Cheney's Gate was in sight, he had no choice but to bear with it. Besides, with my security clearance, I'll probably not learn of the details. I can only do as I'm ordered. Klein exhaled as he followed Captain Dunn to the keeper room outside Cheney's Gate. Chapter 71, Sluggish Phenomenon. Klein repeatedly bent and extended his arm as he watched Dunn push open the keeper's room with his body sideways. The captain's carefulness and high alertness, as well as the ridiculous and laughable, protective actions, left him feeling abnormally tensed. The feeling was identical to what he felt when taking tests of courage that required him to walk through spooky cemeteries at night in his youth. A Grade 2 sealed artifact. Dangerous. To be used with care and moderation. It is something even a formal Nighthawk member does not know the details to. It is unknown how dangerous it is. Amid his tense nerves, Klein found it impossible to curb himself from overthinking. At that moment, his brain suddenly turned numb as though a power switch had been flicked off. Everything in Klein's vision turned slow. Even his arm actions shared the same fate. He saw Captain Dunn stop in his tracks. He came close to him as though in slow motion, extending his palm out slowly before pushing him in the shoulder. Suddenly, Klein's thought processes and vision were restored to normal at the same time. It was as though everything from before was just an illusion. "What happened?" he whispered amid his fright and confusion. Dunn shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Observe carefully." The moment he finished his sentence, he turned around and walked into the keeper's room. Klein followed closely behind and saw 4 other people in the room. They were either seated or standing. One of them was the midnight poet, Leonard. The other 3 were people Klein had never met before. However, all of them shared a common trait. They were all doing the extending and bending arm exercise, with utmost seriousness. Klein Moretti has a miraculous connection with the Antigonus family's notebook. Dunn gave a brief introduction. Then, he pointed to the other 3 strangers and said, "These lady and gentlemen are colleagues from the Backlund diocese. They escorted sealed artifact 2-049 here. This is Madame Larada, Sequence 8 Gravedigger. She is a master sharpshooter." At that moment, the black-haired woman who looked about 30 nodded at Klein in a friendly manner. She looked pretty good. She did not wear a hat and was dressed in what appeared like male attire, a black coat with a white shirt, tight black trousers and black leather boots. The corners of her mouth were slightly curved up. After Klein exchanged greetings, Dunn pointed to a man seated behind the desk. "Iyer Harson, someone just like me." Before he finished his sentence, Klein saw Mr. Iyer Harson in his gray windbreaker turn sluggish with his arm motion. It was as though a gear had lost its lubricant or a joint covered in rust. "What's wrong?" Amid Klein's daze, he saw Larada push Iyer Harson. Only then did the gentleman's actions return to normal. "Was I like that previously?" Klein was first taken aback before he came to the realization. This indicated the dangers that sealed artifact 02-49 held. What would happen if one was not awoken in time? Would one become a zombie? Filled with questions, Klein greeted the charming middle-aged Iyer Harson. "Borja," Dunn said as he pointed to the last Nighthawk. Borja was a cold man with a knife scar on the side of his face. His sharp brown eyes were like an eagle's. He was constantly observing everyone in the room. "Let's set off. The faster we end this, the faster we can seal 2-049, the handsome Iyer Harson said as he stood, his eyes revealing some wrinkles. "So, where is 2-049? Klein surveyed his surroundings curiously but did not notice any traces of the sealed artifact. Of course, he could not see the areas obscured by the table without activating his spirit vision. "All right," Dunn turned and looked at Leonard Mitchell. "You'll be in charge of driving. It is best not to involve Cesare with matters like this." Cesare was the clerk in charge of procuring and collecting supplies for the Tingen Nighthawks while standing in as a carriage driver. He was the one who drove Klein to Welch's home to meet the spirit medium daily. "No problem." Leonard stopped acting frivolous and nodded seriously. At that moment, Klein saw Iyer Harson bending over. He picked up a black metal chest which had been obscured by the table. The chest was carved with resplendent stars and the crimson full moon. It was as though there was a formless barrier around the chest. The sealed artifact should be inside there. "I wonder what 2-049 looks like." Klein observed the chest curiously. Thump. 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 Violent knocking sounds suddenly erupted from the black chest. Even the surface of the chest bulged time and time again. Thump. 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 It was as though something horrifying had awakened within the chest and was pounding wildly. The sound of the knocking was beaten into the hearts of everyone present. "It's alive?" Just as Klein had a thought, he saw Captain Dunn's arm exercises turning sluggish, as if his joints were layered with glue. Borja, the Nighthawk from Backlund, pushed Dunn's shoulder, allowing him to recover. "It's like doing the robot dance when one is affected by 2-049. If all of us are under its influence, wouldn't we be some awkward dance squad?" Luckily, 2-049 seems capable of only influencing one person at a time. Klein lampooned to relax his tense nerves. He did not dare halt his arm exercises. He followed Dun's lead and left his cane behind. He then followed behind the 5 Nighthawks through the tunnel and up the stairs to the second floor of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard had gone ahead and notified everyone in the front of the buildings, so Roseanne and the rest had all made their way to the 3rd level. These incidents rarely involved them, but they were not completely alien to them. Another Nighthawk, Kenley, had replaced Dunn in his watch over Cheney's gate. Klein heaved a sigh of relief when he reached the carriage. He looked suspiciously out the window and said, "Won't 2-049 affect the ordinary people on the streets?" From their journey underground to the carriage, sealed artifact 2-049 had already caused 6 sluggish incidents, 2 of which were targeted at him. He had been jolted awake by Captain Dunn and Leonard Mitchell respectively. The rate of the sluggish effect was rather alarming. "No worries, 2-049 will target humanoid creatures within 5 meters of it first. The closer you are to it, the easier it is for you to be chosen. As long as there are 3 people surrounding it, people who happen to be around when the carriage steers past will not be affected," the beautiful, black-haired Lady Lorata explained with a lazy tone. What a weird sealed artifact. Klein thought as he continued his arm exercises. Dunn and the rest of the Nighthawks did not speak on the journey to Ray Bieber's house. They were paying close attention to each other's condition. Only Lorata wore a nonchalant look. At times, she took in the sights of Tinjin's not-so-clean streets, and at other times, she praised Backlund's underground water system. Soon after, the familiar building finally entered Klein's line of sight. The group of 6 made their way to the 3rd level while observing each other. The door to Ray Bieber's house was labeled with the Tinjin Police Department symbol, indicating that entry was forbidden to unauthorized personnel. As Dunn did his stretching exercises, he took out a key. He opened the newly changed lock, then turned around, allowing Iyer Harson, who was carrying the black chest, to enter first. Thump. 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 The sealed artifact in the black chest knocked violently once again, even more violent than before. This made Iyer Harson's arm waver from side to side uncontrollably. It even made Klein suspect that the chest would be pounded open in time. Thump. 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 Klein quickly noticed that Captain Dunn's movements were becoming sluggish. He was about to wake him up when a buzz sounded in his brain. His brain became numb, the scenes before his eyes played as though they were in slow motion. Didn't they say that it only affects one person at a time? Klein's thoughts quickly became sluggish. At this moment, the prepared Lorata and Borja woke each of them up respectively by pushing them. Having his thought processes and vision restored, Klein looked around with lingering fear. He nearly blurted out. "Didn't you say that 2-049 can only affect one person at a time?" Thankfully, I did not stop my stretches. When sealed artifact 2-049 enters its berserk mode, it can affect up to 2 people at once. We can confirm that Ray Bieber is indeed a descendant of the Antigonus family, Iyer Harson said with a mechanical tone. Lorota let out a faint laugh. She looked at Klein and said, 2-049 becomes very agitated when it meets a descendant of the Antigonus family, even if only their scent remains. Its abilities would also increase considerably. I believe you would be able to understand its feelings. Well, I don't. Klein asked curiously, so, is it a living creature? Lorata smiled but did not reply him directly. You'll know in a while. As long as Ray Bieber hasn't escaped Tinjin, 2-049 will lead us to him. Klein could only put his other questions on hold as he walked around the room with the Nighthawks. Amid the loud and violent thumping from the chest, they locked the door, walked down the stairs, and returned to the carriage. Iyer Harson looked out the window several times and confirmed that there were no pedestrians within a 5-meter radius of them. He then placed the black chest on the ground and twisted the mechanical switch to release its spiritual restraints. The violent thumping stopped suddenly, slipping the entire carriage into silence. Not even the breaths of the nighthawks could be heard. Klein held his breath as the black chest opened slowly. A sharp creak that hurt his ears could be heard. Creak. The chest fell as a slender brown arm extended out of the chest. It was about the length of a child's finger. Two arms pressed forward one after another as an object about the size a normal human being's palm appeared bit by bit in front of Klein and company. It had clear elbow, finger, and knee joints. Covered in an oil-stained brown cloth, its face was painted with the colors of a clown, red and yellow. It was a wooden puppet with a weird appearance. 2-049 lifted its head and looked at Klein with its pure black eyes. Its rigid mouth slowly parted to reveal a clown-like smile. Chapter 72, tracking the wooden puppet's face was painted in red and yellow like the common clown. The corners of its mouth were upturned high, revealing an abnormally comical smile. Its lips parted to reveal a dark and deep mouth. Klein, who had locked his gaze with it, felt his hair stand as intense horror leaped out of his heart in an uncontrollable manner. Everything before his eyes grew dull, as though he was looking at the world through a piece of thick brown glass. Klein's thoughts slowed down gradually, and he instinctively wanted to ask for help, but his neck seemed to be held tight by a rope. He couldn't make a single sound, and the single word was trapped in silence. Just then, Dunn noticed his arm exercises becoming sluggish and pushed him heavily. The brown glass before Klein's eyes shattered in an instant. He blurted out the word, help, which had remained dormant in his throat. It reverberated within the carriage, with sharp panic. It's getting stronger, Klein spoke in a very certain tone. Being next to a strange sealed artifact like 2-049 really placed on in terrifying peril if they were not careful. No, it was totally impossible to guard against it. It could only be avoided through other methods. It's normal, Harson said steadily, nodding. Larada chuckled. It seems to like you. Don't worry. It is a relatively less dangerous grade 2 sealed artifact. In her naturally languid voice, the puppet whose joints clearly reflected a human stood up. It began tottering towards its left. Its action was incomprehensible, just like a steam engine that someone had rusted due to a lack of lubricating oil. Robot dance. Klein suddenly had the few Chinese words pop into his head. He had a new guess of the danger 2-049 posed. It assimilates the living things that it seizes control of. If I am not woken up in time by the others, would I have become a human-sized puppet, a real-life Barbie doll? Just as thoughts flooded Klein, Harson was awoken by Dunn. He extended and bent his arms as he pointed in the direction that the puppet was walking slowly towards. He said to Leonard, who was driving the carriage, over there. Leonard couldn't make the carriage pass through the building, so he had to detour. During the detour, 2-049 constantly adjusted the direction that it was facing. It acted like a compass that pointed towards the Antigonus family. Upon seeing the scene, Klein, who was constantly exercising his arms, nearly burst out laughing under the tension. I heard that 2-049 was created by the Antigonus family. Is this an act of loyalty or the perfect example of screwing things up? Leonard drove the carriage according to Harson's occasional instructions. Whenever the strange puppet 2-049 walked to the edge of the carriage, Harson would pull it back and start it all over again. Every time that happened, its mouth would open and two people would be under its influence simultaneously. Klein's taut feelings gradually began to relax. He realized that sealed artifact 2-049 was not as scary anymore. As long as there were more than 3 people present and they constantly maintained their arm motions, if they made sure to wake their partners in time, 2-049 was merely a puppet with slightly unique characteristics. The carriage traveled at high speed, and quickly arrived at the harbor, where warehouses were clustered. After circling a few times, they confirmed that 2-049 intended to enter the innermost grayish-white warehouse. Harson's expression turned solemn. He grabbed the puppet carefully and stuffed it back into the black chest. Thump. 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 Under constant ferocious knocking, Iyer woke up again and again with the help of Borja and Larata as he activated the mechanism with great effort. He then injected his spirituality and activated the star and crimson symbols on the chest. At the reappearance of the formless seal, Iyer Harson let out a long heavy breath. "Let's get down," Dunn Smith said with a low and mild voice. "Leonard, tying the horse here will do." Dressed in windbreakers, suits, or shirts, the six left the carriage and walked into the innermost warehouse. As they walked, they uniformly stretched and bent their arms. This added a comical and ridiculous vibe to the rather tense situation. The Nighthawk Awkward Dance Squad. Klein could only complain inwardly to ease such a feeling. However, there was no other way around it. According to his observations, 2-049 first affected the upper body. Therefore, to detect it in time to prevent a more dangerous situation from developing, they only had the choice of extending and bending their arms, shake their necks or bodies. However, the latter only made one look like a hooligan. As for actions like blinking eyes and striking one's eyebrows, they were either too easily ignored or the action was too big. Neither was a good option. This awkward dance squad is better than Causeway Bay Triad members. Klein sighed in resignation and followed Captain Dunn Smith and company. As they approached the warehouse's door, the deeper his anxiety and worry became. No one knew what kind of effect the notebook had on Ray Bieber. If something dire happened, Klein did not dare pin his hopes on transmigrating again. Furthermore, he discovered that he could still be injured and bleed while chopping ingredients for dinner. The speed at which he recovered at was normal too. He wasn't some kind of monster that was impervious to combat or death. As they walked, Dunn suddenly lowered his non-moving hand and made a pressing gesture to beckon everyone to stop 10 meters away from the warehouse's door. "Klein, divine if there is any danger in the warehouse." "It'd be better if you could tell the level of danger," Dunn said as he turned his head to Klein. His gray eyes looked deep as usual, there was no fear. Klein gave an unnoticeable nod and stopped the hand exercise. He extended his right hand to his left cuff and removed the silver chain that had a hanging piece of topaz. As he was still moving his arms, Dunn realized his sluggish actions in time and woke him up with a nudge. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand and allowed the topaz to hang down naturally. Simultaneously, he moved his right arm, but with a much smaller range of motion. When the topaz stabilized, he half closed his eyes, outlined the spherical light, and entered cogitation. He then mumbled, "There's danger in the warehouse. There's danger in the warehouse." After 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the hanging topaz slowly going in clockwise circles. It turned faster and faster, and in the end, Klein felt like it was pulling his left hand. "There's danger, great danger," Klein replied honestly. Clockwise meant affirmation to the chanted statement, while counterclockwise meant denial. To other Beyonders, even a mystery prior, using spirit dowsing could only determine if there was danger, but it was unable to obtain information regarding the level of danger. However, Klein discovered that when he used spirit dowsing, the pendulum would spin at different speeds, revealing the degree of the answer. Although it was not very accurate and extremely vague, it allowed one to have a rough assessment of the actual situation. As expected of a Seer potion, Klein was rather happy with the outcome. Just as he was about to put away the topaz pendulum, Leonard Mitchell, who had maintained his silence, suddenly spoke. "Divine if there is danger around us also." Dunn nodded in agreement. "Yes, I am worried that the secret order will not give up and that it has placed Ray Bieber's house under constant surveillance. They could have followed us here and could cause trouble at a critical moment." Klein took a deep breath and entered a calm, ethereal state once again. When the silver chain turned stable once again, he recited in his heart, "There is danger surrounding us. There is danger surrounding us." After repeating the statement, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the silver chain. In his dark brown eyes, the topaz pendulum first moved counterclockwise with difficulty. Then, it suddenly paused and started moving clockwise. "There is danger surrounding us." Klein felt a tug on his heartstrings as he spoke carefully. Furthermore, someone had tried to intercept his divination, but had lost to him in the invisible fight. Just as he spoke, an orange-yellow fireball the size of a fist flew towards them. It came crashing towards the middle of the group with its blazing speed. Dunn Smith, who had already drawn his long-barreled revolver before Klein did his divination, immediately raised his hand, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The fireball didn't seem to be affected by the gunshot but continued its original trajectory, as though it was forcing everyone to scatter from dodging. Klein originally thought nothing of the troublemaker who was following them. After all, there were 6 Beyonders present. They were not even short of Sequence 8 and Sequence 7 experts. It was a lineup that was practically unstoppable in a small city like Tianjin. But when the fireball smashed down, he came to a sudden realization. To them, the most dangerous enemy was not the tracker or the troublemaker. It wasn't even Ray Bieber who was in the warehouse in an unknown state, but the sealed artifact 2-049. Once they dispersed and the battle began, they wouldn't be able to wake each other in time. Then, they would turn into real-life puppets one after another. As these chaotic thoughts bombarded him, Klein was pulled by Leonard aside to dodge the fireball. Without the time to feel anguish for his clothing, he saw the Nighthawk split off into 2 groups while dodging. It was done very orderly. Poof! The orange-yellow fireball landed on the ground but didn't stir one bit of dust. It disappeared as though nothing had happened. An illusion? Just as this thought came to him, Klein saw Iyer Harson lift the black chest and threw at least 10 meters away. Stay away from it. Watch it. Iyer shouted. Before he finished his shout, Leonard and Borja had separately approached it. They stood at least 7 meters from the chest to prevent anyone from approaching. As for Dunn and Larada, they each held guns. They stood beside Iyer Harson, who had drawn a thin silver sword. They took up a formation resembling a crescent as they rushed towards the origins of the fireball, while taking note of the peripheral regions. Upon seeing this scene, Klein, who needed to do the arm exercises without his cane, immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He realized he had overlooked an important matter. 2-049 had a limited range of influence. As long as they were at a sufficient distance from it, they did not need to worry about the danger. Klein rolled over and stood up. He stuffed his topaz pendulum into his pocket with one hand while he reached into his holster for his revolver with the other. Chapter 73, First Battle Under the Illumination of the Afternoon Sun. Klein in his dust-coated clothes quickly twisted his revolver's barrel to remove his self-imposed safety. He went into a shooting stance, allowing the light to reflect from the bronze body of the revolver. He held the revolver with one hand, and moved his other arm, cautiously paying attention to anything that could happen around him. At the same time, he was a little worried for Captain Dunn and Mr. Iyer Harson. After all, both were nightmare beyonders who specialized in influencing the enemy from the shadows. He did not know if they were adept at direct combat. Just as Klein was having these considerations, Iyer Harson slowed down, his expression becoming serene and peaceful. He opened his mouth and recited a peaceful poem, one that seemed to place a person into the night. When once the sun sinks in the west, and dewdrops pearl the evening's breast, almost as pale as moonbeams are, or its companionable star, the evening primrose opens anew its delicate blossoms to the dew, and, hermit-like, shunning the light. The recital reverberated around them. Klein nearly lost his tense feelings and completely relaxed. He was lucky that he had experienced something similar before and was not facing Iyer Harson. Thus, he quickly collected himself and entered a half-cogitative state to combat the influence of the poem. Phew! He let out a sigh of relief. He no longer had any doubts about Dunn's and Iyer's direct combat abilities. As he had only advanced recently and still did not have a deep understanding of sequence potions, Klein had forgotten that the Sequence 7 Nightmare was the advancement of Sequence 8 Midnight Poet. They could keep whatever abilities they had before and, in fact, enjoy a small increase in their abilities. The impression Klein had of Midnight Poets all came from Leonard Mitchell. He knew that this job inherited the unique traits of a sleepless. They were good at combat, shooting, climbing, and sensing. They were also adept in influencing the living creatures around them through the use of various poems. In simpler terms, they were violent poets. While Ire was reciting his poem, the large wooden crates stacked up around them seemed to suddenly ripple like water. A man wearing a black tuxedo and half-top hat appeared. But this man's face was painted in 3 pastel colors: red, yellow, and white. The sides of his lips were arched high like a clown, forming a ridiculous contrast with his formal wear that was suitable for joining an evening banquet. Thud. 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 The black-haired Larada, who had been introduced as a sharpshooter, charged forward quickly. She had a gun in one hand and had clenched the other into a fist. She made it within inches of the suited clown in a few steps. The suited clown seemed to be affected by Ire Harson's poem. His body was swaying, and he had a peaceful expression in his eyes. He did not have any desire to retaliate. Larada tilted her body with a boxing maneuver as she pulled back her fist, then punched toward the suited clown's face. Bang! The air crackled as the suited clown shattered suddenly like a mirror, pieces quickly evaporating and vanishing into thin air. At this moment, the suited clown quickly appeared once again in the shadows of the wooden crates a few steps away. The suited clown's figure outline quickly appeared again. The person under the influence of the poem was only an illusion. It was a performance. The suited clown grinned again. It had a comical look as he pressed down on his half-top hat with one hand and pointed a finger gun with the other. Bang! The sound of a shot rang from the finger gun. Larada fell to the left and rolled on the floor, dodging the attack. But nothing had happened, except for the fake gunshot. Bang! 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 Dunn and Ire each lifted their guns and fired steadily. The suited clown dodged adeptly, sometimes to the right and left, sometimes rolling on the ground. It was as if he was an acrobat act in a circus. Suddenly, Larada surprisingly charged forward again. Despite being called a sharpshooter, she was still using her fists. Bam! The suited clown could not dodge the attack in time and could only lift his left arm to block the fist. Seeing the clown stop, Dunn and Ire did not hesitate to each take aim and pulled the trigger. At this moment, the arm that the suited clown used to block Larada's fist ignited with an orange-yellow flame. In an instant, the flame enveloped the suited clown and spread towards Larada. Bang! Bang! Dunn and Ire fired their revolvers, hitting the ball of flame. The flames burned rapidly and soon, all that was left were black ashes floating in the sky. But the suited clown once again appeared behind the stack of wooden crates close by. He lifted his right hand and pointed a finger gun once again. Bang! Amid the illusory gunshot, Larada suddenly stopped in her tracks. She did not charge forward. Mud was splattering in front of her as a bullet appeared. The suited clown was no longer delivering an illusion with this strike. It was hard to discern real from fake, reality from illusion. Bang! 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 The suited clown shot at Dunn and Ire repeatedly while hiding away and appearing at random times. Upon seeing this, Larada squinted and lifted the dull gold revolver in her left hand. Bang! The suited clown suddenly squatted down, avoiding the fatal shot. His half-top hat was sent flying backward, falling to the ground. The bullet had left a visible scorch mark on the hat. After rolling a few times on the floor, the suited clown scaled the stacks of wooden crates with the agility of a monkey. He shot air bullets out of his finger gun from the high ground. Ire Hansen took a few steps back and lowered his gun. He began his recital once again. Wastes its fair bloom upon the night, who, blindfold to its fond caresses, knows not the beauty it possesses. The suited clown jumped repeatedly between the crates. He suddenly raised his hand to scratch his ears and looked at Ire with a comical smile. Could he have stuffed his ears? The sequence potion that the secret order possesses sure is weird. Klein observed the fight from far away as he made silent guesses. Just as his thoughts flashed through him, he suddenly saw a figure appear at the top of a warehouse beside him. Furthermore, it was running straight inside where Bieber was hiding. That figure was dressed in a grayish-white uniform, one which workers at the docks wore. His face also appeared to be painted red, yellow, and white. The suited clown is responsible for distracting Captain and the rest while the other person retrieved the diary. Klein instinctively raised his right hand and shot at the figure on the roof. He had just taken aim when the figure suddenly squatted, switching from running to rolling on the ground. Bang! Klein did not stop pulling the trigger. He saw the figure suddenly pause, blood blooming in a spurt. The figure looked at him in shock. While bearing the pain, he continued charging into the warehouse. That felt like a lucky shot. Klein twitched his lips and pulled the trigger once again. This time, the bullet hit the wooden roof beside the figure. Bang! 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 Leonard and Borja also shot but did not hit the figure. Klein wanted to criticize how terrible their shooting skills were as compared to his when he suddenly stopped pulling the trigger. That's right. Why must we stop him? Didn't I divine that there is grave danger in the warehouse just now? Wouldn't it be great if we let that guy be the vanguard and step on the landmine for us? Leonard and that Mr. Borja must have had the same idea. With this thought, Klein lifted the barrel of his revolver and shot at the sky. Bang! 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 As the gunshots rang, the figure managed to reach the innermost region of the warehouse unobstructed. He lunged downwards, slamming into the roof as he fell down with the collapsing roof. Immediately following the commotion, the black-haired Lorada's eyes suddenly turned black. Her left hand began making a strange pulling action. The suited clown's jumping actions suddenly came to a pause as his ankle seemed to be grasped tightly by an invisible hand. Dunn did not shoot immediately and instead pointed his revolver downward. He opened his mouth and by simply using his spirituality to resonate the air around him, he produced a strange, faint and ethereal voice without the use of his throat. Thus it blooms on while night is by, when day looks out with open eye, bashed at the gaze it cannot shun, it faints and withers and is gone. The suited clown suddenly became limp, as if he had lost the desire to live. Iyer Harson lifted his handgun and took aim, his finger pulling the trigger immediately. In that split second, there was an abnormal and tragic wail that came from the warehouse. Ah! The cry contained immense fear as though he had encountered an unimaginably terrifying matter. The hair on Klein's body stood on end. The tragic cries came to a sudden stop as silence was restored in the deepest parts of the warehouse. It was a skin-crawling silence. Bang! Affected by the cry, Iyer only managed to shoot the suited clown in the belly. HAA! 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 The silence was once again broken from the deepest depths of the warehouse. What should have been soft panting sounded. It reached a crescendo that tightened everyone's nerves. Thump. 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 Inside the black chest, 2-049 had reached a frenzied state. Chapter 74, Bieber Ha. 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 Thump. 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 The loud panting and the intense knocking alternated first before they resounded together. It made Klein and company extremely nervous, as though they were hearing some evil murmur. Taking advantage of the moment Iyer, Dunn and Lorada had their attention redirected, the suited clown suddenly pulled out a long piece of paper from his pocket. Pa! He threw it with his right hand as the slip of paper ignited into a black fiery whip. Then, he lashed it towards the side of his ankle. A fleeting but tragic scream sounded as the suited clown escaped the invisible shackles and did a backflip. Bang! 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 Dunn, Iyer, and Lorada shot but their bullets only ended up hitting the wooden crates. The suited clown did not stay any longer as he pressed down on his wound with his right hand while escaping in a direction opposite the warehouse. He was so fast that in the blink of an eye, all that was left was a hint of his back. And before he vanished, his right hand which pressed down on his abdomen moved towards his left arm. The wound on his stomach had already vanished, looking completely fine. The location on his left arm which he touched with his right hand suddenly became badly mangled, and a silver bullet appeared in the torn flesh. Dunn and the rest didn't chase after him because the panting from the innermost warehouse was so loud that it was making them nervous and insecure. Bang! The door of the innermost warehouse suddenly exploded and flew in all directions. Then, something wrapped with a torn cloth flew out and landed not far from Klein. When Klein cast his gaze over, he realized that it was an arm. Its bloody flesh had been chewed on and its white bones were cracked in an irregular fashion as they jutted out paw. 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 One item after another flew out. First it was a spray of blood, followed by a dilated eye and an ear which had been ripped out brutally. Finally, half a beating heart and intestines filled with yellowish-brown objects came out. If Klein had not seen the more gruesome giant cadaver at Ray Bieber's place, he would have probably vomited there and then. His nerves were on the brink of a breakdown. After a great deal of effort to hold back his urge to shoot into the pitch-black entrance, he ejected the empty shells from his revolver and reloaded with new demon-hunting bullets. Bang! Dunn drew close as he stably shot into the warehouse. However, his bullet was like a shot into the sea. There was no audible response. Ha! 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 The loud panting sped up as grayish-white colors filled the open door. With another two loud shots, Iyer Harson's and Borja's bullets tore through the whiteness, but failed to prevent the color from spilling outwards. It did not leave any wounds or cause liquid to seep out. Klein held his breath and kept himself from shooting blindly. He watched as the whiteness slowly revealed a complete outline. It was a humanoid creature more than 2 meters tall. Its limb joints were all unnaturally twisted. It was as though they had been snapped by someone forcefully. White bones poked out from under its skin as the entire grayish-white surface was filled with gullies, like a human brain that had been stripped from its shell. The monster had grayish-white, rotting, sticky liquid flowing all over it. Its head looked relatively normal, with deep wrinkles and pale skin. As it opened and closed its mouth, Klein could see a porcelain false tooth that looked close to falling out, a few strands of bloody saliva, and bone and flesh that had been minced. Was Ray Bieber still even fucking human? Klein drew a silent gasp as he felt his heart pound rapidly. Bang! Leonard's demon-hunting bullet hit Ray Bieber's forehead and tore right through it, leaving behind a deep hole. Grayish-white liquid flowed out and dripped onto the ground. The liquid wriggled and turned into fat cream-colored maggots. But the monster appeared completely unaffected. It was neither fast nor slow when it pounced at Borja, who was closest to it. Its actual target appeared to be the black chest that contains sealed artifact 2-049. Loss of control of Beyonder powers, Dunn shouted in a deep voice. Larata, it looks like a dead soul, so quickly look for its weakness. All right. Larata did not speak further as she raised her hands to press down on her eyes. Her pupils turned gray then colorless, as though she had entered the world of spirits and a kingdom of dead souls. She looked down at the enemy from a higher vantage point as she searched for a node. Klein saw that a normal gunshot was ineffective, so he did not bother wasting more of his bullets. He lifted his hand to tap at his glabella to activate his spirit vision. He planned on helping gravedigger Larata. From his vision, Monster Bieber only had one kind of spiritual glow left. It was purely grayish-white, a whiteness filled with craziness. Apart from that, Klein saw nothing else. At that moment, Iyer Harson and Leonard Mitchell sang simultaneously. Oh, the threat of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. The power that allowed one to enter a peaceful slumber emanated. The twisted grayish-white monster gradually slowed down as though it could not fight against the charm of the poem. Then, it opened its mouth and let out a shrill cry that ordinary people were deaf to. Ah! Bang! Klein felt a sharp pain in his head as he automatically exited his spirit vision state. He felt warm liquid flowing out of his nose, and when he subconsciously wiped it with his hand, he discovered the back of his hand covered in blood. Iyer and Leonard fell back to the ground at the same time. They had blood stains lining the corners of their lips, noses, and eyes. Borja, Dunn, and Larada each took a step or two back, the color in their face draining. That monster only screamed once, but it appeared to exceed what the 6 Beyonders could withstand. They instantly turned extremely weak. Bam! It closed in on Borja and suddenly swung its twisted joint. Bang! 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 Borja and Dunn shot twice each, but they didn't cause any damage to Monster Bieber. Bang! A blow sent Borja flying out as his long-barreled revolver fell to the ground. He tried to stand up a few times, but failed to do so. The corner of Monster Bieber's mouth had stringy liquid oozing out as it leaped towards the black chest. Bang! At that crucial moment, Iyer Harson shot a bullet at the box to knock it some distance away, preventing Monster Bieber from grabbing it. Its momentum brought it forward by more than 10 meters. The black chest cracked, and as the thumping within turned more intense, it grew more obvious. Found it. The black-haired Larada finally spoke. I need you to control it for at least 3 seconds. All right. Dunn didn't delay any further. He extended his hand to tap his glabella and closed his eyes. He seemed to fall asleep as shapeless waves slowly rippled out one after another. In that instant, Monster Bieber paused and the craziness in its eyes quickly receded. Its thin transparent eyelids began to close uncontrollably as well. Dunn's body started quivering, and something popped up under his clothing and wriggled on the spot. It was as though he hid slippery scaleless snakes within. Larada rushed over and with a roll, arrived under Monster Bieber. She supported herself with one hand while raising a clenched fist, bombarding Monster Bieber's crotch like artillery. Poof! She ignored the corrosive pain but supported herself against the ground and directed more strength once again. She went higher a little as her fist drilled deeper in. Rip! Larada pulled out her forearm as she dragged out an intestine filled with brownish-yellow blood stains. In the intestine, there was an ancient notebook. Ah! Monster Bieber let out a blood-curdling scream, and his body suddenly lit up as though it was melting. Get down! Just as Iyer Harson's hurried shout ended, Klein saw Monster Bieber suddenly swell up. Boom! Amid a loud explosion, the distant Klein was tossed into the air by the shock wave and landed heavily. He struggled to stand against a swirling headache, and he saw Monster Bieber turn into a pile of disgusting, rotting flesh. Then he saw Dunn and Larada, who were a dozen meters away, looking like they had been knocked out. Iyer Harson, Borja, and Leonard Mitchell were on the ground too. Some groaning in pain, some struggling to stand up but failing. Klein was just about to relax when he suddenly saw a familiar object about 2 or 3 meters away from him. The black chest had stopped rolling, and cracked surface was facing the sky. A skinny brown arm extended out. Sealed artifact. 2-049. Fuck. Klein's heart tensed up as he immediately leaped in the opposite direction in a bid to escape 2-049's effective range. The blast from before had thrown the black chest near him. And at that moment, Klein's head suddenly buzzed as his thoughts turned sluggish. Chapter 75, Saving Himself. Oh no. I've been controlled by the puppet. Captain and company are either unconscious, or have yet to recover. They can't even get up. They will not be able to wake me up in time. No. I have to save myself. Everything before Klein's eyes was happening in slow motion. All his joints and his brain seemed to have been coated with an ever-thickening layer of glue. He had no interest in becoming a human version puppet, so he seized the opportunity of not being fully controlled by trying his best to seek a way to save himself. I definitely can't hit myself. There must be an external force. External force. I'll give it a try. There's no time for hesitation. Without the luxury of time to think through things, Klein came to an idea in less than 3 seconds. He moved his rusty knee joint and took a counterclockwise step. At the same time, he did not try to escape the invisible rope that hung around his throat. All he did was recite inwardly. Blessing stem. From the immortal Lord of heaven and earth. He wanted to use the mysterious world above the gray fog to awaken him and escape sealed artifact 2-049's assimilation. Creak. 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 Klein's knees and ankles let out an involved ear-piercing sound. With a slow contorted step, he took another step counterclockwise. Blessing stem. From the Sky Lord, of heaven and earth. Klein's thoughts turned increasingly sluggish as he felt as though he was a computer that had all sorts of bloatware and every antivirus software installed. He lifted his left foot in a jerky manner as he took another step in the required spot. Blessing stem. From the exalted arch. Klein's thought processes turned more and more rigid and sluggish. He took the final step purely out of instinct. At that point, he knew he was almost fully under the puppet's control. Even if Iyer Harson could get up in time to save him, he would probably be unable to be awakened. But his strong desire to live made him chant the final line of the incantation. Blessings. Stem. From the celestial. Worthy. Just as he finished his incantation, the extremely chaotic and hysterical shouts and murmurs sounded. They quickly took over every corner of Klein's sluggish thoughts, shattering them in the process and reducing them to thoughts he had no control over. Klein's brain became a boiling pot of potpourri as his stiff body turned light while his spirituality lifted. Endless grayish-white fog and the dark red stars of varying distances appeared once again before his eyes. It was vast, mysterious, vague, and blurry. Klein's confused mind quickly settled down as he finally regained his ability to think, only to see the magnificent palace. Phew. Thankfully, it worked, he whispered with a lingering fear. According to his previous observations, he knew that once someone fell under the control of sealed artifact 2-049, it was equivalent to death. Normally, there was no medicine that could save the victim. Luckily, his luck enhancement ritual and the mysterious world above the gray fog was not considered normal at all. After pacing a few times, Klein began considering the situation he was in. I can't just stay here the entire time, right? By the time Captain and company wakes up and gather over, I won't be able to explain the situation. As things are right now, I only have the shell of my body, nothing more zombie-like than a zombie. But if I were to take the risk and return, there's no way to guarantee my safety. What if I get controlled by 2-049 again? While suffering from his dilemma, Klein suddenly smacked himself in the forehead and could not help but chuckle softly. It looks like I haven't gotten used to my status as a seer. Before he finished his sentence, he appeared at the seat of honor in front of the long bronze table, sitting on the high-backed chair with the strange symbol. Klein extended his hand as a fountain pen appeared out of thin air. He scribbled a sentence on an illusory piece of paper. Returning to the real world is very safe. Immediately following that, Klein pulled out a projection of a spirit pendulum from his packet. After a few gatherings, he discovered that the items he brought on him were projected above the gray fog, but they were relatively illusory. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand as he allowed the topaz to nearly touch the paper. He calmed his breathing and half-closed his eyes. He calmly repeated the words on the piece of paper. Returning to the real world is very safe. Returning to the real world is very safe. After repeating it 7 times, Klein completed the divination with spirit dowsing. He opened his eyes and saw the topaz slowly oscillating, guiding the silver chain in a clockwise spin. Clockwise is an affirmation while counterclockwise is negative. Returning to the real world is very safe. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he habitually stored the chain away. Then, he released his spirituality and wrapped his body as he simulated a plummeting state. The hazy fog and deep red stars turned ethereal and charged upward. Klein soon saw himself still in a daze in his original position. He saw the brown puppet, halfway out of the chest. He also noticed that the sealed artifact had apparently stopped all motion. His physical senses reached to his brain, and just as he was about to try to move his arm to determine his condition, he suddenly heard a voice concealed within the wind. "Do you wish to be awakened? You can be saved as long as you promise me one thing. This one thing is to help me take that Antigonus family notebook. Nod if you agree. I know you are still capable of completing that action." "Who is it?" "Yes. 2-049 doesn't seem like it's attempting to control me." "That's right. It will not repeatedly influence the same person. There will be a break." Klein was shocked, but he did not show it on his face. At that moment, the voice added quickly, "You can obtain additional rewards if you complete this matter. I know you are a seer. I also know that the Church of the Evernight Goddess does not have sequence 8 that succeeds sequence 9. But our secret order can give it to you." To be honest, I was a seer before. If not, I wouldn't have dared return. To show you my sincerity, I can now tell you that the corresponding sequence 8 of seer is clown." "Clown? Secret order." Klein nearly did not maintain his puppet state. He never made the connection between seer and clown. Were they about to become the head honchos of a circus? All right, make your choice. Believe me, you no longer have much time left to waste. The voice sounded with the wind again. The distant Dunn and Larada were still unconscious. Borja seemed heavily injured as he moaned without moving. Ayer Harson and Leonard Mitchell were in relatively good shape as they attempted to sit up. "Why me?" "The secret order. Is it that suited clown from before?" After he escaped, he secretly returned in a bid to fish in troubled waters. Upon hearing the voice, all sorts of doubts instantly flashed through Klein's mind. Since the person said that he was a seer, Klein attempted using the thought processes of a seer to analyze the situation. He dared return because he divined hope. He believed that Monster Bieber would be destroyed and that we would suffer a heavy setback. He did not take the notebook by himself or deal with us directly because he likely divined that it would contain immense risk. Therefore, he is suspecting Captain and Madame Larada are feigning their unconsciousness, or that this is a trap laid out for him. He did not make further divinations to determine my present state, partially because firstly, he might not have the time. If he waited any longer, Mr. Ayer Harson and company would have regained some of their combat strength. Secondly, he belittles me and thinks it unnecessary. He understands a seer very well and is confident that I'm unable to escape the puppet's control. He is using me as cannon fodder to probe for any traps. From another angle, this also means that the luck enhancement ritual does not cause any abnormal appearances. With his brain no longer sluggish, Klein felt that his line of reasoning was clear. He was quite confident of the thoughts and goals of the suited clown. As for the clown's promise, he believed not one bit of it. Cannon fodder did not have any human rights. As the thoughts flashed through his head, Klein controlled his neck and difficulty nodded. As he did this action, he confirmed that he had escaped the control of sealed artifact 2-049. Just after he nodded, a transparent curtain stirred 2 to 3 meters to his side. It revealed the suited clown who had his face painted with a clown's pastel colors. It was none other than the secret order member who had fled previously. At that moment, as Klein had previously turned around in an attempt to leap out of 2-049's effective range, his back was facing the black chest and the puppet. The suited clown was in front of him to his side. First, it was to stay away from the sealed artifact, and second, to avoid his revolver's barrel. It was clear that he was very careful. The suited clown pulled out a long paper slip from his pocket and shook it vigorously until it turned straight like a wooden pole. He held the wooden pole, and at a distance of 2 to 3 meters, he gave Klein's shoulder a prod in an attempt to wake him. This fellow knows 2-049 very well. He knows that if the scent of an Antigonus family descendant is present, the puppet would go ballistic and control 2 at a time. He also knows that throwing a rock doesn't seem effective. At the very least, I've seen Captain and company attempt similar means. Although Klein did not know why 2-049 had stopped assimilating him again, he did not dare stay within 5 meters of it any longer. Therefore, he waited as he held his breath. Just as the wooden pole was about to touch his shoulder, Klein suddenly raised his left hand and grabbed the edge of the pole and yanked it backwards. The suited clown was caught by surprise as his body was pulled forward. He staggered a few steps forward as the gap between him and Klein contracted once again. He was now less than 2 meters away. At the same time, the prepared Klein squeezed his right finger on the revolver's trigger. Bang! Bang! He shot twice but did not aim at the suited clown. Instead, he had aimed behind him, shooting to the side of sealed artifact 2-049. Before the gunshot rang, the suited clown had taken the initiative to roll from his staggering state. He had instinctively backed off. Klein released his hand which had grabbed the wooden pole as he took several steps away rapidly and rushed out the danger zone. Just as the suited clown rolled twice and was about to jump backwards, his head went abuzz as his thoughts rapidly turned sluggish. No good. He forced me to dodge in the direction of the Antigonus puppet. I'm within 5 meters. How could he not be controlled by the Antigonus puppet? The suited clown stopped from his rolling as he attempted to crawl out with his seemingly rusty joints. At that moment, Klein had already turned around. He held his revolver with both hands as he aimed at the slowly moving target. To him, that was equivalent to shooting a fixed target. Having seen the suited clown's battle with Dunn, Iyer, and Larata, Klein knew that he was agile and good at rolling. Therefore, even when they were just a meter or 2 apart, he had carefully given up on shooting directly. Instead, he forced the clown to dodge to the kill zone, he imagined, where sealed artifact 2-049 was. If the puppet had been ineffective, the suited clown would have determined that he had fallen into a trap. He would then escape by leaping backwards and not pose any significant threat. Bang! Reflected into the indescribable eyes of the suited clown, the black-suited Klein pulled the trigger calmly. Chapter 76, Dealing with the Aftermath. Bang! The silver bullet traversed the short distance of a few meters and accurately bore into the suited clown's neck. Large amounts of blood spewed out, dyeing his skin and bow tie red. The suited clown was unable to let out a cry as his throat seemed to produce sounds of him gasping for breath. He wished to raise his arm to divert the fatal wound, but his joints appeared to be filled with glue. His motions were slow and jerky. Bang! Having entered a half-cogitation state, Klein was not stunned by the appearance of blood. He pulled the trigger once again calmly, as though it was his usual daily practice. A grisly hole appeared on the suited clown's forehead as crimson red spewed out. The luster in his eyes dimmed as the intricate revolver's might was far higher than what Klein had imagined to be. As his knees buckled and his arms hung down, the suited clown gradually fell to the ground. His eyes were frozen with a dazed look. His body convulsed a few times before it slowly relaxed and stopped moving. Having delivered a headshot, Klein turned around in a cool manner. He spun his revolver and allowed the empty shells to fall down. Then, dressed in his black formal suit and half-top hat, he walked towards Iyer Harson. He pulled out the final silver demon hunting bullet in his pocket and inserted it into the revolver's chamber. The reason why he did not turn back to look at the suited clown's tragic fate was solely because of his discomfort with his first kill. However, it was necessary. He did not know what would happen if the suited clown was under the full control of the puppet. Furthermore, he did not dare risk entering sealed artifact 2-049's effective range. After all, no one knew if something odd would happen that prevented his self-rescuing luck enhancement ritual to fail. As for the items on the suited clown, Klein only cared if there was the so-called clown potion formula or the relevant clues. However, this was not something he was in a hurry to carry out. In a while, he could do it together with Dunn, Iyer, and company. If the Nighthawks had it, it also practically meant that he had it. There was no way that they would be unwilling to share the potion formula of Sequence 8. At most, he would be required to accumulate his contributions over time. After all, he had only become a seer recently. It would still be a long time until he fully digested it. As his thoughts churned, Klein quickly walked next to Iyer Harson. The gentleman in his grey windbreaker struggled to sit up but failed at every try. He was covered in dust and mud from the fall. "Mr. Harson, what do you need me to do?" he asked, squatting down. He pointed the revolver in his hand at the ground in case of a misfire. Iyer gasped for air and sighed. The monster was too strong, if not for its weakness. Then, he pointed at a sky-blue metal bottle beside him and said in a self-deprecating laugh, "I was trying to consume some medicine, but my hand shook." The sky-blue bottle was about the size of Klein's finger. It was not longer than 5 centimeters long and a cap that hid spiral patterns had fallen to the side. The liquid had completely spilled. Klein reached out to pick up the bottle. As he looked at it with narrowed eyes, he answered helplessly, "Mr. Harson, there are only a few drops left in the bottle. Go to Borja and search his body. In his inner pockets," Iyer said as he gasped for breath. "All right." Klein stood up and casually asked, "Is this restorative medicine? An item from mysticism?" "No, it only has certain restorative effects. The main goal is to stimulate our minds and squeeze out the potential of our bodies. It allows to maintain a decent state for a short period of time until we return, where we can receive treatment." Iyer attempted to sit up only to fail again. "Its name is the Goddess's Gaze. Remember to let Borja drink half a bottle." Klein did not delay any further as he turned around. He briskly arrived at Borja, who was groaning in pain. He found the uniform sky-blue metal bottle from the Nighthawk's pocket. After removing the cap, he carefully held the bottle to Borja's mouth. Having sensed it, Borja tried hard to open his lips. The bottle was held up as dark red liquid flowed in Borja's mouth. Klein estimated the quantity and stopped just in time. He then screwed the cap back on. The medicine was rather effective. It only took Borja a few seconds after drinking to regain the spirit in his eyes. Furthermore, he whispered, "Thank you." With that said, he pressed down on the ground as he slowly sat up. He first dealt with his wounds before walking to the unconscious Larada and Dunn. Then, he retrieved the Goddess's Gaze from the latter's inner pocket. Klein returned to Iyer's side and fed him the remaining half-bottle. After Iyer panted a few times, his actions suddenly became nimbler. He stood up as though he had never been injured. "I'll help Borja. Help that partner of yours." The gentleman with the charm of a middle-aged man pointed at Leonard Mitchell. Klein had no objections to it. He turned around and jogged to the poet, Leonard. "There's no need. I can drink it by myself." Leonard, with his disheveled hair, smiled as he raised the sky-blue bottle. Upon seeing Leonard agilely get up by pushing up with one hand, Klein, who wanted to lampoon, was suddenly stunned. "Leonard's injuries are lighter than I expected. He had the ability to consume the medicine from the very beginning. That also means that he could see me walk counterclockwise as I did the luck enhancement ritual. No, that's still all right." I had chanted inwardly, and the luck enhancement ritual does not appear odd in any way, or the suited clown would not have fallen for it. But even so, Leonard, who had long recovered but chose to watch by the sidelines, had seen quite a lot. Things like me not being affected by 2-049 and my sneak attack on the suited clown. Just as Klein's eyes narrowed slightly, Leonard, who was walking in his direction, stopped beside him and chuckled softly. "I actually wanted to save you but discovered that you didn't need it. Don't mind it. There are many special people in this world that can always do things others can't, such as you, and me." Leonard smiled as he went past Klein and walked to the awakening Dunn and Larada. Narcissist. Klein thought silently as he felt a lot more relaxed. From the looks of it, Leonard Mitchell hid quite a bit of secrets. As he regrouped with the rest while deep in thought, he saw Captain Dunn wear a cloth and pick up the Antigonus family notebook that was covered in yellowish-brown blood stains. The notebook's cover was completely made of thick black paper. It suffused an aura from an ancient and distant time without any signs of softening or rotting. It was nearly identical to the one he saw in his dream. He even suspected that flipping it open would only make him see the fool wearing splendid headgear. However, he soon realized that he was overthinking things since Dunn had flipped open the notebook to make a final confirmation. Klein was unable to discern the words on it due to his poor angle, but he was certain that there was no drawing of the fool with his gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. Ahem. There's nothing wrong with it. Dunn closed the notebook and held it securely. Then, he looked at Ayer and company. Let's store this notebook and sealed artifact 2-049 behind Tinjin's Chinese gate. We can wait until all of you are recovered or Backlund sends someone over. Upon hearing that, Klein felt a little disappointed once again, but also felt happy. He wished to see the Antigonus family's notebook once more and figure out the reason for the death of the original Klein, Welch, and Naya. However, he also felt that the ancient item was filled with misfortune. It often brought catastrophe, so he did not dare touch it. Handing it to the church's headquarters and sealing it is considered the best choice. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. All right. Ayer Harson, Borja, and Larata nodded in unison. They then turned around and arrived beside sealed artifact 2-049. They woke each other up and stuffed the puppet which had resumed moving into the black chest with an opening as they monitored it strictly. Everything is back to normal. Ayer sounded a little more relaxed. Inside the dimly lit black chest, the puppet wrapped in oil-stained cloth flipped over with its body creaking as it aligned its clown-painted face with the light source. On the creepy face, under the black pupil-less eyes, 2 hardly noticeable crimson cracks appeared. Meanwhile, Dunn, Leonard, and Klein, who had mustered his courage, began searching the suited clown's corpse. They found paper flowers, handkerchiefs, poker cards, glass pieces, and all sorts of strange items. However, apart from that, he did not seem to carry anything of worth or potential clues. Other than the wallet with 70 to 80 pounds and 10 plus solely. Klein secretly sighed. With money in mind, he immediately looked down and inspected himself. His face nearly fell literally. His formal suit that cost several pounds had torn in 5 to 6 spots which required mending due to his rolling on the ground. Furthermore, it was covered in dust and dirt stains. Dunn shot him a glance as the corner of his lips curved up. Losses during a mission can be reimbursed. Reimbursed. Upon hearing the term invented by Emperor Roselle, Klein instantly felt wonderful. Yeah. This suit just needs some proper cleaning and mending before it can be worn again. It will still be presentable. When the reimbursement comes, I can buy another set and I can take turns wearing them. I am not the kind of person that uses a reimbursement for something other than what it was intended for. However, I should consider getting a set of clothes for combat in the future, such as a black windbreaker like Captain. Clothes with slightly poorer material would be much cheaper than a tuxedo. TSK, has the reason why the bastard, Leonard, doesn't like wearing formal suits been due to him having such considerations? Let Fry take care of the dead body. We'll see if he can find what the man originally looked like or find any relevant clues. Dunn touched the suited clown's face paint with his gloves. Then, they searched the innermost warehouse and saw that there were splotches of bloody flesh that looked like they had been smashed by boulders. They also saw one white bone after another that had been strewn everywhere. Ray Bieber was absorbing the power in the notebook via an ancient ritual, just like how we would consume a higher-level sequence potion. A ritual like that is full of danger. It must be performed in an environment isolated from all disturbances, and the ritual would have required him to enter a deep sleep for a certain amount of time. That was probably why he had yet to leave Tinjin. Dunn guessed at the possibilities after inspecting the warehouse. Upon hearing such a description, Larata laughed. Her black hair contrasted sharply with her pale face. Such a pity, we awakened him ahead of time. His anger at being woken up truly left a deep impression on us. This is a kind of losing control. Dunn looked towards Klein and told him, as both an explanation and a lecture. Why didn't he just leave Tingen and try to absorb it elsewhere? Asked a perplexed Klein. Ayer laughed and pointed to his head. People influenced by ancient or sinister powers often are lacking in this department. At that moment, Dunn inhaled and said while hiding his pain, Leonard, you are still in good condition. Stay here and do not allow ordinary people to come close. The rest of us will immediately search for items among Ray Bieber's remains. We will return with them and the sealed artifact, as well as the Antigonus family's notebook. We will then get Fry, Royale, and the police to come here. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.